2, and 1. All right, what is up, everybody? How we doing? Thank you all for tuning in today, as always. This one's gonna be an interesting one. It's gonna be the kind of starting point of a certain type of conversation I'm looking to get into here, and it's more of an ideological-based conversation format. You know, I'm trying to get from everything, from all perspectives. Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, etc. And I thought it'd be a cool place before we get into the actual nitty-gritty of ideologies to kind of get the opposite of said belief systems when it comes to an atheist perspective. So yeah, thank you for joining me today. What should I this is awful. What should I refer to you as? I'm sorry, but that's the one thing we didn't discuss before we started.
You can call me Joseph.
Joseph, sorry about that, brother. As you guys can see, I'm very professional. So yeah, thanks for joining me, Joseph. I appreciate it. You want to tell everybody about yourself a little bit so they kind of have an understanding of what your thought process is and how you might like to address said conversation?
Yeah, sure. So I live in the United States. I always have. So I'm coming at this from a Western perspective. Most of the religion that I've encountered has been Christianity, although I have some light exposure to other religions. So it's not that I'm completely in the dark about what various religions have to say. It's just that I don't particularly find most of their claims persuasive. I grew up in the Midwest, so it was a pretty religious area. And when I was a teenager, I started having some questions. I started looking into apologetics. Apologetics, if you don't know, is like the art, I guess you'd say, of trying to persuade people that a God exists. And my family was pretty religious, so I thought that would be kind of cool. So I started looking into various arguments. And then as I started reading into those, I realized I didn't like most of them as arguments. And that's what kickstarted me starting to ask questions and sowing the seeds of doubt. And by the time I made it to my next semester, I didn't really have any religious beliefs anymore. And things have just kind of progressed from there.
So what were some of the arguments that were presented to you that you didn't really agree with or you didn't find appealing?
Sure. So there's all sorts of different categories of arguments. Like you've got teleological arguments. Teleological arguments say that people know a God exists because there's certain features of design and things. So people who look at various life forms and they say, "Oh, this like bacterial flagella. Bacteria have this some bacteria have this rotor flagellum thing that helps them move around in liquid, and it's a pretty complex piece of cellular machinery." And the way a teleological argument would go is that piece of machinery is too complex for it to evolve by natural means. And so by that reason, they think that points to the existence of a God. Another kind of teleological argument would be like the fine-tuning argument of the universe. Some people suggest that if any of the physical constants of the universe were any different, the universe couldn't exist in its current state. And so they use that to say that there's evidence of design and that a God exists. So those kinds of arguments are called teleological arguments. I don't particularly like those because I feel like that's it just amounts to, oh, there's something that we need to research, and maybe at some point in the future we might have an answer to some of those questions, like how physical constants came to be, or how the bacterial flagella of whatever species evolved. Or on point number 2, sometimes we do have answers to those questions, and they just aren't aware of those answers. There's another category of argument that I really like called ontological arguments. So these are the kinds of arguments that define things in such a way that you cannot, it's a logical conclusion that a God exists in an ontological argument. So Anselm of Canterbury he had a pretty famous ontological argument where he defines God in a certain way, and then it's a logical contradiction for that God to not exist. So that's how he knows that a God exists. And then Alvin Plantinga is a more contemporary theologian, and he has his own ontological argument as well. So that's another kind of category of arguments where you follow like a logical framework, you define God in a certain kind of way, and it's a logical conclusion that God exists. There's other kinds of categories of arguments. There's like the moral argument. There's there's a lot of different kinds of arguments that people have attempted over the years. I guess is the moral of that story.
Yeah, I think a common thread throughout any human belief system is that they'll find any excuse in the world to kind of back up their claims, no matter what the claim is. So I feel like you could continue listing a variety of different ways that people address the belief of God and their backing of it, however subjective it might seem. I feel like there's probably an infinite amount of ways that you could go with that.
Oh yeah, there are countless. If you just go to Google and type in arguments for the existence of God, you'll find lists and lists and lists of things that people have thrown out there. Some of them are pretty creative. Some of them are actually worthy of a little bit of debate. There's a wide variety of quality, I'd say.
So are you are you the type of person who looks at everything more of a scientific backed perspective opposed to, subjective, like outlandish claims more than anything?
For the most part, science isn't something that, we don't have a science for everything. Mm-hmm. If we have outlandish claims about, here's an example, the conspiracy theory where people in politics are actually lizard people aliens, there's not a science that helps us answer that particular kind of question. So it's kind of outlandish, but it's not something that you can really necessarily use science to say, oh, well, that's not true. Science is more for answering concrete questions and testing different models of reality. So for example, tectonic plate theory, that the Earth's crust is made out of a bunch of big plates of rock, and the mantle kind of pushes those plates of rocks around. And when those plates of rock bump into each other, it can form mountains, or when they pull apart, you can have things like the Mid-Atlantic Rift. That's something to help us explain the kinds of things that we're seeing in geology. That's the sort of thing that you would use science for. Or the theory of evolution. How did life become as diverse and interesting as it currently is? What's the process that led to what we're currently seeing? That model of reality, we worked on that. There's Lamarckian evolution, which predates Darwinian evolution, and that was one guess as to how that might have happened. And then we have Darwinian evolution, and we're like, oh, you know what? This explains things a little bit better than Lamarckian evolution did. So we're going to stick with that one.
Could you give a brief explanation of what the, not the Darwinian, I forget the gentleman's name you just mentioned, that theory of evolution opposed to Darwinism?
Oh, yeah. So to do that, I'll start with Darwinian evolution just as a...
Perfect.
So Darwinian evolution is evolution by natural selection. So a species or a population will develop over time in such a way that things survive and breed more effectively. And that happens through natural selection. The weak die, the organisms that aren't able to reproduce as effectively don't reproduce, and so there's none of their genes in the next generation. And so generation over generation, anything that wasn't able to reproduce it doesn't make it to the next generation. And so the gene pool is more selected for things that survived and reproduced really well. By contrast, Lamarckian evolution has its tenant. I don't know what to call it, but things evolve in order to fit into their environment. So a horse which attempts to eat leaves from a tall tree needs to stretch its neck in order to reach those leaves. And so its children will have longer necks because of the strain from its parents. That's one way that Lamarckian evolution can be envisioned. That's at least the example that I had.
Now, have we completely discredited that as a logistical explanation, or have we kind of merged that with the modern understanding of Darwinism and kind of just combined the two of them? Because that seems kind of realistic in a sense to me for some scenarios, I feel like.
There is a little bit of a version of that is real. So there's epigenetics. Epigenetics is the phenomenon where some genes are expressed in certain environments, but not in others. So I'm not a biologist, so I don't have like really good examples, but there is a little bit of that. But for the most part, Lamarckian evolution, at least as the primary explanation, is not accepted. We just have a more refined understanding of what is happening with the way the environment that a parent is in does in some way impact what genes are expressed in their children, but not quite to the degree that Lamarck was suggesting.
And that's kind of along like the dominant gene pool type of thing, correct? I'm very naive when it comes to understanding biology myself. Very, very less knowledgeable than you are, I guarantee you that. But I vaguely remember just high school biology class talking about like dominant genes or something like that being passed on to offspring by parents. Doesn't that kind of dictate certain things? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
So that's a bit of a separate thing. So dominant and recessive genes are because our genes come in pairs. So we have they're called alleles, and for different proteins that our genes are encoding for, we can have two different versions of that. Like we can, how to describe this? So like if both of my parents have dark hair, there's a lot of genes that go into hair color. But if they're primarily passing on the dominant gene, which is the darker hair color for the most part, then I'm more likely to have the expression of the darker hair color. Like for a dominant and recessive gene, the thing that makes a gene dominant versus recessive is whether when you put it next to another gene, whether it's expressed or not. So like if one of my parents has blonde hair, and one of my parents has dark hair, and I'll get this mishmash of dominant and recessive genes from them. But if I get a dominant gene from my dark-haired parent, even if I get the recessive version of that from the other parent, I'll still express dark hair. Like that's what you'll end up seeing for the most part.
Gotcha.
It's a bit more complicated than that because something like hair color is actually covered by a bunch of different genes, but that's the general idea.
Fascinating.
So natural selection can take place on either dominant or recessive genes. So for it to take place on recessive genes, it mostly happens on the order of the entire population because one individual won't necessarily express that gene just because they have it. So like, let's say that blonde hair is like a good trait to have because you don't need the melanin to protect your scalp from the sun's rays, and it is less resource intensive. Like your body can put proteins toward other things. So that would be kind of a valuable trait in some environments. But if it's a recessive trait, not everybody will express that. But natural selection can still act on the population as a whole, if that makes sense. So like as more people have that recessive gene, sometimes it'll pair up with another recessive gene and you'll have somebody with lighter hair and it'll express those characteristics which are good in that particular environment.
It's crazy, man. It's crazy. See, when we talk about things like this, it just makes me, and this is kind of pertains to the conversation as a whole, it's like, obviously you do, but for me, it's hard for me to conceptualize the fact that this is just kind of like an evolutionary like accident in a sense that like there was no external interference with the development of us as a species or the species on this planet as a collective, just based on how intricate our systems really are, and just how, like, I don't, it just seems almost too perfect in a sense to just be coincidental, I feel like.
I don't know, like if anything's happening for a couple billion years, like you're gonna end up with some weird stuff. When I look at the diversity of life and I look at the interesting array of, you know, cellular machinery or like weird characteristics, when I look at the platypus, you know, I just I don't know, I just kind of appreciate how long it's been. I kind of think about the precursors to whatever we're looking at.
Yeah, I think about that. No, with platypus, both humans in general, you know, just Neanderthals and Denisovans and things like that. It's crazy the trajectory that we as a species have kind of evolved into the place of where we are. You know, coming to the place where we are now, where it's like we have these just random little bits of information that magically appear in our brains, and these ideas can be physically manifested into tangible material things in our environment. You know what I mean? Something that just springs up in our brains, we can somehow turn into reality. And I know that's an over exaggeration of a really simple thing, but for me that's so mind-boggling that just like, you know, over a course of millions and billions of years, we've become these organisms that are capable of literally just creating things out of thin air, more or less, with just the resources around us. I feel like that's just so crazy. And obviously, we're not the only species who can do things, but like that. But to the extent that humans can, it's very, very just it's mind-boggling to me at times.
It is pretty cool. I don't know, just everything from right after a human being is born, like we're immediately observing the way other human beings behave because we're a social species, and just like our ability to learn and think about things in really abstract ways. Like, here's an example: mathematics. Like, what use would a tree have for mathematics? Like, if it knew mathematics, probably very little. But human beings, like, think about weird abstract stuff. We can think about like numbers between numbers. Like, you could think about counting numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I feel like a lot of animals might be able to conceive of something like numbers for small amounts. You know, like if you show a cat 3 treats versus 4 treats, it probably on some level understands that 4 treats is more treats. But our brains, we can think about fractions. You know, we can look at 3.5 treats and it doesn't completely destroy our brains. And then past that, we can think about irrational numbers, things that can't even be expressed as fractions. We can think about complex numbers. There's all sorts of number systems that have very few ways that we can understand them in some kind of physical system, if that makes sense. They're super duper abstract. But I don't know, we make use of it and it's useful to us. Also, it's just a nice thing for our brains. Our brains are really good at abstract reasoning. So things like math are good practice for us. It helps keep those skills sharp.
Absolutely. That's a good way to look at it. You know, like a cow would definitely understand that 4 is definitely more than, you know, any lesser number. But to the extent that that's pretty much the rudimentary understanding to us, but to them, that's like the epitome of their understanding, I feel like. Whereas us, we don't understand these numbers. We actively search to uncover even more reality of them in different potentialities. It's very crazy.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So you mentioned... Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I love math. That's my primary background, to be honest.
Yeah, that's my polar opposite. But numbers always frighten me. I don't know. I can never click with them. You did mention as a child. You mentioned before you brought up the math part. You mentioned just being a child and how as soon as you're born, you kind of recognize the things around you and what people are kind of doing around you. So for you in particular, you said you grew up with Christianity as your religious background originally, right?
Yeah.
So was that introduced to you by your family, or was it just peers around you, or how did that kind of unfold?
I don't know if you can hear me, but I have lost my monitor and I can't hear you anymore. I'm trying to figure that out.
I can hear you, but it's not as clear. Can you hear me at all or no? Yeah, I'll pause this for 1 second. Sorry, guys. This is the power of the internet.
I'm gonna mess with my settings to make sure that my computer doesn't go to sleep again.
Yeah, no worries.
Pretty sure that's what happened just there.
No worries. Power of the internet. It's a beautiful thing, but it's very temperamental at times. No worries.
Oh yeah. Okay. Okay, I think I'm good now. Sorry about
perfect. And you can hear me fine?
that. I can hear you just fine.
All right, beautiful. Okay, so yeah, how did you kind of get introduced to the idea of Christianity? Was it a family thing? Was it just environmental, or was it kind of a concoction of the both, or what was that like?
I'd say that it was a combination of the both. Both of my parents were pretty religious. I guess pretty religious isn't necessarily the word. I'd say that we were moderately religious as a family. Like, we went to church occasionally, but it wasn't every Sunday. And we usually didn't go to like the Wednesday evening service, but it was more often than just like the Easter, Christmas services that a lot of people do. Not that there's anything wrong with, wherever you fall on that spectrum. I'm just kind of pointing out where we were. But then, I don't know, everybody in my environment was also fairly religious for the most part. Like, I'd go to school, and I had a teacher one time who said that evolution wasn't real. That was an interesting thing. Or that the Big Bang Theory was something that he had to tell us because the state required him to tell us, and he wasn't happy about it. But like, I don't know, it was just kind of all over the place.
So was it like a progressive decline in your faith of the religion because of just like things you were kind of recognizing to be, falsities, or from your perspective just like inaccurate? Or was it kind of like just an abrupt thing where you were just like, oh, this is absolute nonsense to me?
I think it was pretty abrupt. So like, I'd say that there was a good period of time where I was one of the more faithful people in my family. Like, I actually wanted to go to church in situations that other people didn't want to go to church. And sometimes, like, I don't know, I'd try to go by myself. But like, it wasn't, not everybody in my family was as interested as I was, I guess. I found it to be like a really interesting and important topic, right? I think a lot of people do. And so I wanted to, act accordingly. But then as I started looking into apologetics specifically, like the reason I started looking into it is because in Christianity, there's the doctrine of hell, where if you don't believe in Jesus as your Lord and Savior, you go to hell. You just go for eternal suffering, at least in most denominations. There's like different flavors of how hell is conceived, but like that's the general idea. It's a bad thing. So I thought, oh, well, I'll look into various arguments and, try to do my part to convince people of the truth. But then as I started looking into that, I just didn't like most of the arguments, I guess. I found certain ones just riddled with holes. And just overall, they were pretty unpersuasive. So after a certain point, I took out a sheet of paper and I decided, all right, I'm going to make a big list of reasons to believe in a God, and then whether there's some competing explanation that is, by general standards, more realistic. And I was able to come up with something for most things. So I just kind of dropped it one day.
That's a real interesting approach. I actually like how you went about that, opposed to just being like, oh, hell's kind of nonsense, therefore it's all bullshit and I give up. You know what I mean? You kind of put a lot of actual, like, pro and con list type of thing, in a sense of kind of like weighing out the which kind of carried more weight to it. I find that pretty interesting, actually. Did you come up
Oh,
with
yeah.
that concept yourself, or did you like kind of have a discussion with someone about this, or was it all kind of introspective, just impulsive kind of thinking on your own? Not impulsive, that might be the wrong word, but you know what I mean, like in the moment type of thinking, just introspectively.
Oh, yeah. No, it was mostly by myself. It wasn't not impulsive, if that makes sense. Like, I it was just like in one day, I took the information that I knew that I had recently gathered of apologetics, and I was like, well, you know what? I'm gonna evaluate my own beliefs because I realize now that I'm not going to be able to convince most people of this stuff. So I should, apply that to myself and just see where I land. So I did, and this is where I am. Like at first, it was just the immediate beliefs that changed. Like I stopped believing in a god of any kind. I realized after a little bit of thinking, probably the same day, that an afterlife probably wasn't real either. Pretty soon, it was also ghosts. Like I realized, oh, you know what, ghosts are probably nonsense too. And like it was kind of just a lot of things sort of fell out of me evaluating those beliefs and making, I guess you'd call that a paradigm shift.
Were you kind of in like a nihilistic perspective with this? Were you kind of like doom and gloom, like okay, everything I know up to this point, I religiously is nonsense, and my kind of, when you get pretty in depth into religion, as you seem to kind of be, you said you were kind of like the most religious in your family at one point. I feel like that's a big paradigm shift where it kind of affects a lot of aspects of life. So did it have any like fatalistic viewpoints put in your head, like life is meaningless, I mean what's the point of any of this, or was it just kind of more of like, okay, well it is what it is? How'd you kind of go about that?
Honestly, it was more, it is what it is. Like I don't know, I was more concerned with whether something was true than how I felt about it. I didn't really have, like, I was still trying to figure out, like, oh, well, if this isn't true, then what else isn't true? Like I was in that mode for quite a while. Like I didn't really have much mental bandwidth for evaluating how I felt about the situation. It was just like, oh well, I guess there's probably not a God. Like, here we are. Oh, do you think that maybe an afterlife isn't real as well? And then I was like, oh yeah, probably not. And then like, I don't know, slowly my political beliefs began to morph as well because, like there's a lot of different parts of our ideologies that are intertwined in that way. Like a lot of people's religious beliefs and their political beliefs are pretty closely related. There's a lot of people who are single issue voters, specifically with respect to abortion, and almost all of those people approach that from a religious standpoint. So that's just one place that like people's beliefs are intertwined. And I don't know, I just went through the process and started updating my beliefs and trying to figure out what I could actually establish is true based on the best information available.
Yeah, that's interesting. The separation of church and state has kind of been overshadowed nowadays in current society, especially politically in the U.S. in particular. It was a big point of interest during the formation of the country into the Constitution and all that, and it's kind of been tossed out the window. It's pretty much indistinguishable on the right at the moment. When it comes to hardcore conservatives or things like that, a lot of them are, like you said, kind of intertwine their religious beliefs with their political tendencies and views on life, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that I'm different. Like I have certain views about religion. Like I don't necessarily have like depending on how you label things, it's not necessarily religious views, but they are related to my political views. Like, for example, any policy which seems like it would impose a certain religious code on people in law, I would be opposed to that. Like, and that's partly wrapped up in just my like not being a part of that religious group.
Absolutely. Did you? I don't mean to I digress off the current topic. I've had this kind of since we kind of started discussing the childhood aspect. I've just been having this in my head. Did you realize that this might sound a little ridiculous, but did you realize there was other religions out there, or were you just like sheltered from the realization that there was probably an infinite amount of other ideologies that you could kind of adopt or look into? Or was it just so like disturbing to you when you realized that the falsities in Christianity in particular that you just were kind of not even interested in looking into other avenues?
I'd say that it came later. I don't know exactly how I would have approached that at first. All right, hold on. I'll take a step back. I knew that other religions existed. Pretty early on, I knew that there were such a thing as Hindus, for example. Mm-hmm. But I didn't, I wouldn't have been able to name a single Hindu god or goddess before I made this shift. I knew that Buddhism was a thing, that there was such a thing as Buddhists. And I knew that there was this guy, Buddha, that was this enlightened person. I knew very, very surface level, one-liners about a good portion of religions. Or Judaism, for the most part, Christianity minus Jesus, minus the New Testament. It's obviously a little bit more complicated than that, but that was my understanding at the time. But once I dropped, the views of my religious upbringing, I didn't use that and then say, oh, well, which religion is true then? I then kind of adopted this position where it's well, probably none of them. I should know more about them. And at that point I did start, doing some research just to make sure that I was more informed. Because I didn't again, I grew up in the middle of nowhere. I grew up in the Midwest. A pretty religious environment, and it's predominantly Christian. It was a rural environment. I didn't know any Hindus. There wasn't a city near me. I didn't it's not exactly a diverse population out there. So the only religion I was ever exposed to was Christianity. Before college, it was just that. But after dropping my religious beliefs, I didn't decide, oh, well, I'm going to see maybe Hinduism is true. Maybe Judaism is true. Maybe Islam is true. I didn't do that. I mostly just said, well, probably not. I could probably use most of the same reasons that I'm currently using to doubt Christianity to doubt those things.
That's pretty valid at face value. Honestly, they pretty much all share a lot of the, especially a lot of the practiced ones in the West kind of share the same rudimentary foundational belief systems. I mean, the details are kind of different, but they all kind of hold the same the same doctrine to a certain extent. So I feel like that's pretty understandable to not really delve right into those right after coming off of the realization of the Christianity. What's the word I'm looking for? Conclusion. Sorry, I couldn't think of the word there. It's pretty understandable. I asked because for me in particular, I grew up Catholic as well. Not Christian, but more Catholic Catholicism. To me, they're pretty much hand in hand, though. I mean, it's kind of interchangeable in my perspective. But
in math lingo, we would call that a subset.
Yeah. Which there are a plethora of subsets of Christianity in particular.
Lots.
What really got me started with this when I was maybe 8 or 9. I realized that there was other religions for the first time. I actually thought about it to the extent where I blew my mind as a child. And I immediately went to Catholic school, my next Catholic school class, and asked one of my teachers about it. And the teacher was very apprehensive. And I don't remember the specifics. I just remember, her being kind of startled about me asking. And that was kind of the start for me where I was like, wait, what the heck? Why are people reacting so weird that I'm just asking about other things? You know what I mean? It's there's more people who believe other stuff than believe what I believe. That must mean I'm not right. And that was kind of a spiral for me.
Yeah, that difference of opinion can be really, really uncomfortable if you're not expecting it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially as a child, I feel when because your circumstances as well, you're kind of surrounded by like-minded people. You kind of adopted their belief kind of without really understanding the full scope of the swimming pool. You know, you're on like the kiddie end
Right,
of an ocean. You know, it's
there was no alternative presented to me. It's not like in school we had a class where it's like, oh yeah, this is Christianity, and this is Shintoism, and now you're going to evaluate these two belief systems and decide which one is true. And then everybody just happened to pick Christianity. That's not the way it worked. It was just that everybody picked Christianity because that's all that there was around you.
yeah, it's nuts. Yeah, I don't know how you feel about this, but I feel like Catholic Christians in general I feel to me is the one of the most hard set group of people to have opposing ideas with, like in a discussion, just based on my own experiences with family members and friends and whatnot. People who seem to follow these doctrines tend to not want to delve into other ways of thinking. Like they get very abrasive when it comes to alternative ideas with these, and it always kind of boggled my mind a little bit.
Yeah, so I think that there's two main reasons for that, particularly that are specific to Christianity. One is that temptation is like a major theme in a lot of different areas of the Bible, like Satan tempting Jesus, or like not succumbing to temptation yourself, because it's better for you to cut off your hand or poke out your eye than to suffer eternally, that kind of thing. Like just temptation is like a constant theme. So if you're exposed to anything that might ever potentially dissuade you from your religious beliefs, that's very, very dangerous, according to like what you would read in the Bible. And the second major reason I think for that is that, like, especially in Christianity, there's a call to evangelize. Like part of Christianity is spreading the message and making sure that everybody knows what your beliefs are, and that you don't shy away from those beliefs. You know, like a lot of people really, really, really focus on the converts, and so they want to have those discussions with people to persuade them that they're right, not necessarily to learn anything new about other people's beliefs.
Yeah, in a sense, it's kind of like the political spectrum too. You know, it's you can have a conversation with the hardcore proponent of either side, either ideology, when it comes to political spectrums. But it's good luck changing their actual mind when they're set in stone. You know, it's quite funny to me, actually.
Oh, it is. It's pretty rare, I think, to have a conversation where people are actually willing to listen and potentially change their minds. It's not really a common thing.
Yeah. Which is very sad to me, because man, it's like I don't mean this in an offensive way. If people perceive it that way, so be it. But that's not my intention. Sorry about my dog barking there. Jeez, I don't mean it to be offensive, but it's like the likelihood of your one religion being the true one is very, very small. You know, so I don't think people understand that, like, the likelihood of you actually being 100% correct is astronomically pretty much impossible. You know, I don't know if people allow that to settle in their minds or not. They definitely don't in a lot of sense, but it's very shameful that we're so blinded to these things.
Yeah, like I mean, again, part of it is probably just the resistance to temptation. You know, you don't want those kinds of doubts to linger in your heart too long, because it can pull you away from the God that you believe in. And that it makes sense why this is where we've landed. You know, I don't have a whole lot of questions about how things ended up this way, but it is, I agree with you, like, kind of shameful that, like, we just can't change our minds.
Yeah.
I forget who it was. There was somebody who was talking about, I don't even remember what field of study this was in, but somebody was saying that when you're listening to an argument, if you were actually just following the facts through the argument and, you know, making your conclusions based on whatever the argument said, then you wouldn't have people who listen to the entire argument and then they cross their arms and like, no, that's probably not true. This was particularly relevant to atheists who, like, hear arguments for the existence of God, and then by the end of the argument, they're like, that's probably not true. They aren't accepting the conclusion of the argument. Instead, at the end, what we say is something to the effect of, give me a minute to find a problem with this argument, because it's probably wrong.
Yeah, I think that's pretty profound, honestly. I like that a lot.
So there are two ways that I feel about this. I do have like kind of mixed feelings. I encountered this piece of information pretty recently, and I don't know exactly how to fully process it. But on the one hand, I think there's a good point there. Like if you hear an argument, you should be like somewhat receptive to the conclusion of that argument. But on the other hand, if the conclusion of that argument is something that is contrary to something that you believe, that is, you cannot hold the conclusion of that argument and another one of your beliefs at the same time because they simply can't both be true. It makes some sense to say either this argument is true and I have been tricked into my beliefs that I have currently held up to this point. Like if you run into a surprising fact and you're like, oh, I wouldn't have assumed that was true because I believe these other things, but now I know that that's not true. You have to, on some level, agree, oh, I was sort of tricked into having these beliefs that I had previously. Either you were tricked into having those beliefs and this argument is true, or you're being tricked right now. Your beliefs before were valid, and you held those beliefs for a lot longer, and you acquired them from a wider variety of sources. And it's the current argument that you're looking at, which is flawed. So on some level, I think that there is a rational basis for being hesitant when you encounter new information. That's it. I mostly wanted to ramble about that.
I think it's also a third. Correct. Feel free to object if you disagree, because I'd love to get into it if you don't agree. But I feel like there's also a third option there, where it's you can be presented with new evidence and adopt it into your current understanding of whatever field you're looking at. Me in particular, I've had a pretty rapid shift in cycling in my outlook on life. But the last 4 or 5 years, I've really just kind of collected a few different ideas and merged them into my own understanding. Because I had a belief that was foundational, and then I was presented with other ways of thinking, and I kind of just took what I liked out of it, accepted it as not true, but accepted parts of it to benefit my idea, and kind of adopted of my own. So I feel like that's kind of also possible, to kind of be presented with the information and kind of have your current understanding and belief merge with the new information as well. I might have explained that bad. That sounded pretty bad when I said it. Sorry. I don't...
No, that makes sense. But I do think that we are talking about slightly different things. Like you're talking about being able to... I without knowing the specifics, it's a little trickier, but like hearing something and saying, well, it's not necessarily that I believe that that's true, but I can use the information or the claims being made to better my own life. And I kind of understand that. Like I think I agree with you. For example, Lent. My mom was Catholic. That was kind of my upbringing as well. And I don't believe in giving up things for Lent, but also one year I gave up basil pesto for Lent because I was eating a bunch of it, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to use Lent as an excuse to challenge myself to not eat basil pesto, just to see if I can actually make it 40 days without putting it on everything, because I really was putting it on everything. And I made it. And that's great. It was a personal challenge, and I found that emotionally fulfilling. Or like Ramadan. One Ramadan, I realized, oh, you know what? I could just give up weed for 29 days. I can do that, right? And then I just didn't do any weed for 29 days, the entirety of Ramadan. It wasn't properly doing Ramadan, like I didn't fast for food or anything. But it was still emotionally fulfilling to like complete something like that challenge. And if I wanted to take on a more extreme challenge, maybe I would do like a proper Ramadan some year. Like I can see doing that kind of thing just for emotional fulfillment, even though you don't necessarily believe that those things are true. But what so on one hand, I do get that, but on the other, I think there is a bit of a difference in that and the idea that if you want to figure out which things are true, you have to be a little bit more restrictive about it. Like at no point in those personal challenges am I considering that those things are necessarily true. I mean, I guess there's like some consideration that they might be, but that's beside the point. I don't believe that they are. But if you're faced with a new argument and it conflicts with something that you currently believe, if your goal is to figure out which of those things is true, you have to do a lot more work to try to reconcile those beliefs and either believe only those things partially, accept that you don't know, or to hold one or the other of them.
I absolutely agree. I just find it very difficult to actually boil down to what is objectively true when it comes to this topic in particular, because it's all so subjective. You know, whether you're whatever idea you have, it's not provable. You know what I mean? No one's gonna know until this is all over. You know, until your body's no more and your soul or whatever you choose to believe in has moved on. You'll know or you won't know because there'll be nothing. But for now, I don't know if we can actually pinpoint what's true of any of these. You know.
I mean, I don't think that we can necessarily say with 100% confidence whether there is an afterlife, whether there is no afterlife. Whether Krishna is real. But I think that we can make some educated guesses. You know, like, for example, if I give you this idea of Russell's teapot, have you heard of Russell's teapot?
I have not.
Russell's teapot is a teapot that floats in space between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter, somewhere in the asteroid belt. It's out there in space. It's just a regular teapot. Okay. I believe that this teapot exists, hypothetically speaking.
Okay, yeah.
Is that a rational belief to hold?
Are you asking me, or like? If you're asking me, it's okay to have, but you know, I have a lot of questions about it that I have to really get in the nitty gritty to fully decide if it's true or not.
Yeah, well, okay. So, yeah, what kinds of follow-up questions would you have?
How did it get there? You know, who put it there? Why is it there? Are there images of it? How has it not been destroyed? How is it, you know, I have a pretty simple questions, I guess. Just, you know, stuff like that.
So here's my quick attempt at answering those questions. We don't know how long it's been there. We don't know how it got there. We don't know why it's there, if it's there for any reason at all. We don't have any pictures there, but we just think that it's probably there because, you know, teapots are in a lot of different places. Why not the asteroid belt?
Listen, I'm going to tell you right now, you should get a job at NASA because you just did a NASA job of answering. We don't know when there's no pictures, but it could be there. You're hired.
Yeah,
interesting. Okay. I see what you're saying for sure. I didn't mean to, I wasn't shutting down the idea. I was just, going with it. But, yeah, that's valid. That's a valid hypothetical.
So I like this. I like Russell's teapot because I think that it really drives home the point that if you have this idea and there's not necessarily any reason for you to believe that thing is true, it doesn't really matter if you can prove that that thing is false. You know, like, I personally believe that there's probably no teapot in the asteroid belt floating around waiting to be found. Like, I think that it would be an immense waste of resources to investigate that idea any further. Like, there's no point in looking, right? Like, it's probably not true. The consequences are pretty low. It just doesn't really matter. I feel the same way about Russell's teapot as I feel about most claims from a religious angle.
I can respect that.
Is there an afterlife? Well, I don't have any good reason to think that an afterlife does exist. You know, like, I know that people say that there is, and they're very, very confident about it, and they'll bring up all sorts of stuff. If they're from a Christian background, they'll talk about near-death experiences and people who have, like, been in a coma or whatever, and then they come back to life. And they talk about this tunnel that they saw and all of their loved ones being there and a sense of calm or whatever.
May I interject for a moment?
Oh, yeah.
I just want to throw it out there to people listening. For near-death experiences in particular, gets me. I have a strong dislike toward that idea. I don't know if people realize there's a substance called dimethyltryptamine, and it is the strongest psychedelic that we know of on this planet. It's indigenous to the Amazon jungle, and it's found in roots and plants. You mix certain things like concoctions, you create the most potent psychedelic on Earth. Here's what people don't realize is we pump dimethyltryptamine in our own brain and in our body. We possess it in and of itself. When we sleep, we produce very small quantities. When we come to very near-death scenarios, I'm pretty sure that that's probably what's happening in that scenario. I just want to throw that idea out there because I feel like people cling on to that in particular as a strong evidence for afterlife. Coming from someone who does believe in an afterlife, in myself, I just don't like those stories because I think it's very easily explainable by biological and chemical makeups in our body. That I just want to throw that out there as an idea because those get me very mad.
Okay. I mean, I agree with you in that aspect. Like, I also think that the biological and chemical explanation is just, we already have the biochemical explanation, right? Like, we don't need to hypothesize anything that's like an external reality that people go to when they die to explain what we're seeing here. Like, we already have an explanation now. Oh yeah. So people who believe that an afterlife exists, like if they come from like a Christian background, they might refer to near-death experiences or whatever. Or if they believe in reincarnation, they might point to a bunch of examples of people who claim to be reincarnated people who had previously died. There are all sorts of people who claim that they're reincarnations of somebody that they knew or somebody with knowledge that could only be possessed by one person who's already dead. They put a lot of stock in that kind of evidence. But I also think that we have explanations for that. You know, I feel like our current explanations are just a little bit better.
What would your explanation for that be, just out of curiosity? I don't mean to press you on. I'm curious, though.
For the reincarnation claims?
Yes, because that one fascinates me personally.
So I feel like there's a lot of different angles to take here. One, compare them to psychics. The idea behind some of these claims is that I'm going to start labeling people for talking about this abstract concept. Person A dies. Person B is born later. And then person B claims to be the reincarnated spirit of person A. Okay. So if person B has knowledge that only person A could have had, then the claim goes that reincarnation must be real, because the only way that they could have that knowledge is if person A's spirit was actually in person B's body. My counterpoint to this is that there's all sorts of ways to, in a way, fake having information that you otherwise shouldn't have. Like, psychics do this all the time when they're doing cold readings of people. Like, if you've ever gotten a palm reading or a tarot card reading, there's all sorts of different ways that you can do a reading of a person and try to delve into their life subtly to try to get more specific information to reveal to them, to make it sound like you really know what's going on in their life and that you actually are reading the future, or that you know them on a deep personal level if you're reading auras or whatever. The same techniques can be used for being the reincarnated person, the reincarnated spirit of person A. Like, you could get that information from a relative by cold reading them. You could even, a lot of psychics will do this thing where they'll do research on a person in advance so that they really do have information that they couldn't have had if they didn't know you, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Person B, being reincarnated, could have acquired that information about person A, you know, without being the reincarnated spirit of person A. There's lots of ways that you can make it look like you have information that nobody else could have had. That's angle number one. Angle number two, a lot of the time, it's not really information that nobody could have had. Like, the information that they're given is something that happened in person A's family history. Like, when they were a child, that happened with another relative who, by the way, was also there and experienced it. Other people do have that information. Or maybe there was a photograph or a video of the event. Their beliefs at a certain time. Like, that's another thing that you can just, a lot of the time you can sort of make guesses about. And it's not information that nobody else has. You just, you know, pretend that it is.
I'm going to throw an outlandish thing out there. I know the answer already, just based on, you know, how you describe these things. You know, have you ever heard of the Akashic Records?
What was that?
The Akashic Records, it's called.
Akashic Records. No, I don't know the Akashic Records.
Basically, it's a concept that there's a hive mind of ideas and experiences and thoughts and whatnot, things like that, that kind of just exist in whatever dimension or whatever other place our experiences are collected in. And humans can tap into other people's versions of them because it's all kind of in a melting pot in itself. And I've heard people kind of explain that as one of the rationales for how some, especially young people, because that's the one that a lot of people talk about with past life, is usually children expressing, oh, I was a mother in France in the 15th century. It's usually things like that I've heard of. And I've heard people kind of use that, more spiritual people or, the guru types, try to say that that's kind of what it is, opposed to like psychic abilities and whatnot. Because I've actually heard someone argue your exact argument against someone like that, and that's what they used. I don't know if you were familiar with that term or not.
No, so now that I have typed it into Google and looked at it, and I'm looking at the Wikipedia article, I have encountered this before, but I haven't like done any in-depth reading or anything. But I have something to read for later.
Oh yeah, for the better or worse. But yeah, it's there.
Oh yeah. So I do, in the same way that I'm interested in religion as a topic of study, I do kind of like occult stuff. Like, again, I don't believe in occult stuff, but I do find it really fascinating. I do the same thing for conspiracy theories. I like conspiracy theories as like a topic of study, and like why people believe conspiracy theories and like how they propagate. I find all of this stuff very fascinating.
Oh, you'd fucking love me, man. You love me. What is it about these types of topics that get you interested if you don't necessarily believe them? Do you just like, is it kind of like an entertainment type of aspect, or is it just kind of like a sociological, psychological evaluation of how people perceive things?
To be honest, I don't really know. On some level, it's definitely the latter. I do think that it's an interesting phenomenon that people will believe things that on the surface do seem ridiculous in some situations. For example, like the lizard people conspiracy. I feel like that's the go-to example for conspiracy theories that are like really, really silly, but like people believe them very, very wholeheartedly.
Absolutely. And as the conspiracy theorists in the room, not all of us believe in flat Earth or lizard people. Just for everyone to realize.
Yeah, like or like the flat Earth. Yeah, I understand that there's like a spectrum,
it's weird.
So I don't think this is hard. Like I don't know exactly how I would rank them, but I feel like there's something about the conspiracy theories surrounding JFK's assassination that aren't like as ridiculous on the surface as the conspiracy theory about the reptilians, or that the Earth is actually flat and NASA is hiding it from us. Like I feel like there's kind of a ranking system.
Yeah,
I don't think.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I don't have a good reason to think that there's anything spectacular going on with JFK's assassination. I do kind of see how different circumstances around it make it look weird to certain populations, and on that level I can sort of empathize. But on a personal level, I do go with the more official story. But then, like, on a higher level, like flat Earth theory, how? Like, that's one where I can't really empathize on how somebody could even reach that conclusion. I feel like there's like this sliding scale of ridiculousness. And sometimes people just go past it. And I just find that really interesting.
Yeah, I think it draws kind of the similarity to, comparing, Scientology opposed to Buddhism. I think that's kind of the JFK to flat Earth, because it's like, okay, JFK, Operation Northwoods. The Joint Chiefs of Staff presented a plan to do false flags to kill citizens and start a war. JFK says no. 6 months later, he gets his head blown off. Okay, Scientology. There is a billion-year soul contract, but then it opposes to, so those are the latter of the two, but then it opposes to Buddhism. Oh, I just want to enlighten myself. A lot more tame. Kind of the bit JFK kind of connects. The flat Earth and the Scientology are like, yeah, man, every human being ever is lying to you. The Earth's not what you think it is. There's more land everywhere. Billion year soul contracts. So I think it's like a broad term, religion, conspiracy. There's a lot of subcategories inside of said things, I feel like,
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and it's the more extreme stuff that I find interesting in like a sociological kind of way.
I do too.
To tie us a little bit more back to like the religion topic, like even if you target a specific religion, it's usually pretty diverse in terms of like the range of beliefs that you get. Like if you look at Christianity, there's a bunch of different denominations, and then within those denominations, there's different subsects, and then even in those subsects, there's like a degree, like there's like a spectrum of how adherent somebody is to the core tenets and how liberally somebody interprets things. Like there's a bunch of Christians who believe in evolution and who believe that the universe is approximately 14 billion years old, and who understand the scientific understanding, that the current best understanding that the Earth is about 4.5 billion years old, and they don't let their religious beliefs tell them that certain scientific truths aren't true. But then there are also a lot of Christians who do allow their religious beliefs to give them the confidence to say that certain scientific findings are not true, because the Bible says certain things about how plants and animals came to be and how old the Earth is if you use the Usher chronology. So like there's just this wide spectrum. And I find that kind of cool.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think even within the last couple of years, didn't the current Pope start talking about reincarnation in a sense, I believe?
Ooh, I don't know about that, but I
think there was something along those lines. He was talking some kind of like, traditionally more Eastern approach to religion and whatnot. He was kind of flirting with the idea of it, which is at face value very crazy compared to what we've seen with Christian history, thus far. I mean, even going back to, the 1500s, or freaking before that, during the Crusades and all that. It's just the evolution in
a long way from putting Galileo under arrest.
Yeah, crazy, absolutely crazy. Was it Galileo who requested as his final meal before death to not eat anything but to have a meal in his honor once a week or something like that? Was that who it was?
Oh, I don't know about that.
It was one of those sure. Figure. It might have been like one of his disciples, but someone along those lines. When the church went up to him, was like, "All right, what do you want to eat before we kill you?" He was like, "I don't want anything. Just hold a meal in my honor once a week or something." And it always stuck with me because that's like the most gangster move you can ever do.
That kind of reminds me of the Apology, where Socrates is asked what should be his punishment for corrupting the youth of Athens, and he said, "Well, I've never corrupted the youth of Athens. I was only a figure for good. So if you want to punish me in a way that like correctly accounts for my deeds, I think that you should put me up in the Parthenon and treat me to room and board for the rest of my life."
Oh, I love it. I love it. I always wondered if things like that were just kind of like fables, or if they actually held validity, because if I like to think they actually hold authenticity to them, because it just makes them seem much more enjoyable to think about.
Yeah.
But who knows?
With Socrates, it's really hard though, because like he never wrote anything. Like we don't have any documents that are signed Socrates. That was all Plato writing, and it is possible that Plato had a teacher named Socrates, and that some of those stories were actually Socrates doing something and Plato writing about it. But there are also a lot of places where Plato just used Socrates as like a character for like expressing some idea or another. We're really far off the beaten path here, but...
Yeah, I apologize. I wanted to touch on one thing before we kind of get back to where we were foundationally. You mentioned your interest in the occult. Are you into the occult in the sense of like Aleister Crowley type of occultism? Or like, what is that?
Yeah. Crowley's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I'm not like a practicing occultist, but I don't know, like I have a book that I read that was like Principles of Witchcraft. and I keep that on my religion bookshelf. Like I have a bookshelf for like where I keep my religious texts and stuff like that. Because again, I think that's kind of interesting. I don't have anything by Crowley, but I do find his history kind of interesting.
Yeah, I was always very cautious when I even looked into such things because, I always, even when I shredded my, ideas of Christianity out, even to this day, I still hold my belief in the occultism as kind of like not a taboo, but like a thing to kind of touch with a 5-foot pole if I'm going to touch it, And I don't know what it is about me, but I find it interesting, but I'm a little weary of it.
That makes sense. I will say that not having religious beliefs does make that a little bit easier because I don't have any reason to be afraid of it. I don't think that there's any demons who are going to like come out and attack me because I picked up a book about witchcraft to learn something about what witches believe. Or like, I don't know. Not any more than I think that a demon will pop out of somewhere to punish me for reading the Bhagavad Gita.
So with that being said, what is your belief system on, mythological aspects of religions when it comes to demons or deities or prophets, angels, stuff like that? How do you obviously you discredit them because you don't believe in the religion, but how do you look at those? You look at them as like just analogies for different things, or do you look at them as like just a straight up just a fabrication of reality?
Oh, that is a great question. And I think it depends on the context. So like if I'm watching the movie Constantine,
great movie.
They are literally existing things, and they aren't metaphors for good and evil or anything like that. They're actually powerful forces. And in that context, I would give you that answer. But in another context, I'm trying to think of a good example where there's like not much debate. I'm kind of at a lot. If we're talking about, let's say that you believe that the serpent in the Garden of Eden was a demon. You might not. You might believe that it was just a snake, or you might believe that it was Satan in disguise. That doesn't really matter. But what you might also believe is that it's just a metaphor for temptation. And in that context, if that's the thing that somebody believes, I don't hold any stock in any particular interpretation of that. But at the very least, my conversation with that person will be as though it is a metaphor instead of as a literally existing demon.
So context kind of matters of how you perceive these things.
Right. Because I don't think that they exist. So if I'm going to have a conversation about angels and demons and the way that they do exist, or if they exist metaphorically, whatever, it basically hinges on the beliefs of the person that I'm having the conversation with.
Gotcha.
Or whatever work I'm reading, or watching in the case of the movie Constantine.
Gotcha. So when you see kind of, because I, based on what we talked about previously, just in the discussion we had when we first connected, you mentioned how you'd kind of gave me some talking points, and a lot of them, I was thinking about, and a lot of them seem to kind of connect. And then I started just peeling back the layers in my mind, and especially with paganism and whatnot, because a lot of paganism is usually traditionally polytheistic. So I figured, this would be an interesting question too. How do you look at all these different deities and gods and goddesses and whatnot? Do you think they're all just recyclables of previous ones, or do you think they're actual original concepts that some people, particularly atheists or agnostics, choose to think are just recycled things?
That's a good question. I'm not sure it's the same answer for all different formulations. If you ask, if we're looking at the God of Christianity and the God of Islam, that's roughly the same God. We're talking about a God with the same kinds of qualities, a similar personality, even if that idea makes a lot of people unhappy. Pretty similar kind of thing. But it's not recycled material necessarily. Like, I feel like most Muslims, at least in my experience, will readily acknowledge that it's the same God. It's just that their version is a more accurate depiction, you know?
One quick thing, I just want to, but the God of, I'm gonna give some resistance, so don't mind me, but the God of the Old and the New Testament seem to be really substantially different beings in Christianity alone.
Oh, yeah, that's fair. That has been pointed out by a lot of people, and also I feel like a lot of theologians do have a response to that. I don't. It's not something that I've read too much into because I don't know. I don't think that necessarily matters too much. You know, like I'm not in a position where I have to personally reconcile the personality change between Old and New Testament, or reconciling how the Word of God has such a different tone across all of these different books.
Fair enough. Okay, continue. I didn't mean to sidetrack. I just wanted to throw that in, but please continue.
That's fair. So yeah, in some places, like, somebody might say that it's recycled content, but I feel like that's a little bit simplistic. Like, just because two gods or conceptions of a god share a lot of characteristics, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's recycled material. In a lot of places, they will readily acknowledge that it is like the same deity. It's just that they maybe the other half disagrees and says that it's not the same deity. I was about to bring up Mormons, but that is a bit of a different topic, because like the Mormons, or people in the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, like, you know, they call themselves Christians. Like they believe in Jesus, and it's just that they believe that Jesus also had a mission in the Americas. And you know, there's some other stuff that they believe that are, you know, added onto that, but it's basically the same idea. They would call themselves Christians, in a lot of different contexts. Christians, on the other hand, would probably resolutely deny the Christianity of Mormons. It's just that there's some disagreement about like who belongs to which labels. That was slightly more off topic than I thought it would be.
No, you're that's literally the name of this podcast is Off Topic, so don't worry. You fit it in. The reason I asked is because when I look at these types of things personally, I look at it as kind of Marvel versus DC. I'm a comic book and movie nerd when it comes to that stuff. I look at it as you can directly connect the parallels between characters of both companies and IPs. I mean, they're very similar. I mean, a good instance is Aquaman and Namor. They're both literally the god of the oceans and whatnot. They both own a land. They're just different offsets, but they're the same thing. So I feel like that's how I've kind of recently perceived these things. I think a good example is kind of Osiris compared to Jesus, you know? That's just one of probably a plethora, but I've always seen a ridiculous amount of parallelization in these figureheads. And I think personally, everything I've said has probably offended people as we've gone so far anyways, but I just find it very sloppy and dogmatic that a lot of religions didn't even try to come up with creative outlets for their figureheads at this point. It seems like a lot of them are just reinterpretations of old rock stars, you know, passing off as new music type of thing.
So you've put me in a kind of weird spot, because now I have to say, to their credit, it's not like there's a whole lot of different godlike qualities to work with. You know, you can have animistic traditions where gods are like representatives of certain objects, or like I guess that's more pagan. Animism is a little bit more like before that, where like the holy thing was the object itself. You know, you can have like holy objects with power. But you could also have gods with different domains, like you would in various pagan, like various flavors of pagan religions. But there's only so many things that you could be the god of, right? Like every culture everywhere is going to have some god of the ocean. Because if you believe that there's a god for nearly everything, you're going to have a god of the ocean. That's one of the biggest things in our experience. God of the sky, also super popular. There's, I don't know, a god of the earth, you know, most of the elements probably are going to have a god associated with them. Beauty, also super common. But like, these are all things that are, within the realm of human experience that you might think that there might be a god of. So like, as you're developing a religion, or like as a culture is like working together to figure out what things are probably true and what things have like a creator associated with them, if that's the guess that they're going with, there's only so many things that you could put together a god for, and those gods, even across different cultures, are going to have a lot in common. I feel like there might be some recycled content. Like in some places, there is going to be a direct copycat kind of scenario, like between Poseidon and Neptune, or between Zeus and Jupiter, or Hermes and Mercury. All of the Greek and Roman connections.
Yeah, that they're very close with Ares and Mars and Kronos and Saturn, Eros and Cupid. Like they're literally identical to one another. I agree with that.
So in a situation like that, it might even be that they're not necessarily supposed to be different gods. It's just that there was a whole lot of translation problems. Or maybe all of these gods went by various different names and they just chose different names at different times. That's another way of like helping to explain that phenomenon. It's not necessarily that people are trying to recycle material, though. It could just be that you have gods of time and knowledge and a messenger god, a god of war, that kind of thing. And if you're in a different culture and you come up with a god of knowledge or a god of love or a messenger god and a god of war, they're likely to have a lot of things in common.
Yeah, I like what you said there, how they're kind of they're the same gods, but based on the time, they just go by different names. I like that. 'Cause I like how you got it presented as if it was objective and stuff. That was cool. I like that. That's a good train of thought.
To be honest, I'm not sure what the current literature has to say about what the most likely explanation is for like how to connect the Greek or Roman gods. I'm not. That's not my field of expertise. Just as a disclaimer.
Yeah, I should give a disclaimer too. Nothing I'm saying is my field of expertise either. So anything I've set up until this point to keep going is not my expertise. I just like rambling. But no, dude, you're doing great, by the way. Just so you know, like I mean, you've packed a ton of facts in there and information. You're doing absolutely wonderful. I'm really enjoying this conversation. All right, let's kind of shift a little bit here. So I mentioned earlier, I asked you if you were kind of nihilistic in your approach when you kind of came to the realization of discrediting Christianity. You said you weren't, which I was actually happy to hear about, because I don't mind. I don't mind atheism at all, even though I believe in a higher power. I believe in some outlandish claims, and I admit they're outlandish because, like I said, the reality of me being correct is astronomically low, so I accept that. But when it comes to nihilism, I don't like that sect of atheism in particular, because I don't like the meaninglessness of reality, I don't care really what you believe in, but once you start thinking that you're not worth anything or nothing you do matters, it kind of saddens me more than anything, So, how do you... Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'll let you finish your question.
No, please go ahead. It was going nowhere better than where you're going to go. Go ahead, please.
Oh, okay. I think that there is a couple of different ways of looking at whether life has meaning. Like, to me personally, like, I'm having a good time right now, and whether a god exists or not, I find this fun. Same thing with roller skating. Whether a god exists or not, I think that roller skating is fun, and so I'm probably going to go roller skating for a good portion of my time. And it also doesn't really matter whether there's a god or not. Like, if there's a god or not, the fact that I'm roller skating occasionally, like, it's irrelevant. Like, if there's a god, he doesn't give a shit. And if there is no god, like, nothing to care at all. So there's a lot of stuff that just doesn't matter just on the surface of it. And so I feel like we're sort of used to it as a concept already.
Yeah. No, in your explanation and viewpoint, how you just described it, I agree. I think I was being more pessimistic in my approach of it. I was kind of looking at it as like, literally nothing I do matters. I don't care enough to do anything that, like, I don't have to do. Like, I'm going to be dead in 80 years and that's it. Because the people do follow that. I've met people, one person in particular that sticks in my mind, where this person, she is very, very pessimistic in just every outlook, and it stems from nihilism and just realizing for herself that literally nothing matters, and it brings herself and other people down in the sense that it's like, I think it's a very non-productive means of existing. That's why that's at everything we say today. That's the one thing I'm actually wholeheartedly against. Just nihilistic approaches when it brings other people down as well.
I feel like that might be more tied to a person's personality than necessarily their views about religion.
Fair enough.
Is what I'm. I don't know. I guess at this point, that's my conclusion at the time. Maybe if you ask me in 20 years, I'll think about this differently. But like, there's a lot of Christians who are totally miserable, or who believe that their lives don't have any meaning, or who are really upset about the current state of affairs, and that's fine. I mean, like, I'm not saying that that's like an invalid state of being. I am happy that I find fulfillment in my life. And that I don't find things pointless and like I'm just spiraling. And I do feel like I'm kind of swimming in a swirling chaos of the universe, but I kind of like it.
Yeah.
And then there, on the flip side of that, there's all sorts of Christians who use their religious beliefs to bring them great meaning, and they use that as like a driving force for good in their lives. Atheists, I feel like you have the same two types of people. There are people who mope and they're really unhappy. They feel like nothing that they do matters. And it's really not related necessarily to the metaphysical claims of the religions that they do or don't believe. They're just, they're really pessimistic, and they don't think that they have impact or power in anything. And then there are people who believe that your actions have consequences and what you're doing is meaningful. Two sides of the same coin. One of those sounds a little bit worse than the other, but you get the idea. And that you can live a fulfilling life and use whatever tools at your disposal to enact good. Maybe atheists tend a little bit more toward nihilism just from, historical precedent. Like Voltaire grew up in a really troubling time, and he was like kind of pessimistic. Nietzsche, oh man, that's he was looking at stuff in a dark place.
Yeah, that's an understatement.
It's just that the existing literature tends to be a bit bleak.
Yeah,
but I don't feel like it necessarily has to be. And also, it's not like there isn't bleak literature from various religions. Like, I don't necessarily have examples from anything that's not Christianity, but like Kierkegaard, he's like one of the founders of existentialism, and his writing, he's unhappy in it, like for a good portion of the time. Like, I remember one quote that I'm going to absolutely butcher, but that he lives in a state of agony because he has to either choose to hold a rational belief based on things that he can reason through, or to risk suffering eternally. And that was agonizing for him.
Man.
That's dark.
That's an understatement. Jesus.
Yeah, I feel like it just, it kind of depends on the way that you look at things, and not necessarily, well, that was really broad. It's not just like the metaphysical claims that you believe are true, whether there is a God or is not, or whether there is an afterlife or is not. I feel like it's the way you approach those facts. Little fact with quotation marks around it, like whichever one of those things that you believe, like how you approach that is going to contribute more to whether you're happy or not.
Yeah, I agree. I think I was being kind of tunnel visioned when I kind of broadly threw the idea out there. You really just opened my eyes. I'm just thinking of, there's probably a plethora of, mega successful individuals out there who are absolutely and have been atheist, but they don't have to be nihilistic in that sense too. And even if they are, they can still succeed. I think a lot of it is definitely environmental and probably psychological. Human body. I'm not going to rant about this, but we need proper nutrition, we need proper exercise, diet, supplementation. If you're not having those things, I think an easy way to excuse your neglect and care for reality is an easy way to throw that off, is just say, oh, it's because I don't believe in God, or it's like, why would God make this world when I'm just so miserable? I think I was kind of blinded to that sole understanding opposed to the other implications.
All right, yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like, there's just like a wide variety of ways to look at these different situations.
It's crazy. Do you get into conversations like this or even debates often with obviously me, I could talk to anybody about anything without getting too upset, so it doesn't really bother me even when I agree or not, believe it or not. But I know that people take this stuff very, very serious. So do you ever have like conversations where people kind of just switch on the drop of a dime?
Not often, I'd say. Usually it's like a little bit more targeted, or there's like one primary disagreement that we're trying to suss out. And I know that a lot of people love to point out arguments on the internet as like places where nobody ever changes their mind, or where it's one of the most pointless things that you can do. But I feel like it's really, like, I really, really like it. I like targeting one specific disagreement and doing my absolute best to untangle everything and trying to figure out what makes one person be on one side of the argument, what makes another person be on the other side of the argument, and see which of those things might be more consistent. At least that part is personal. The other person doesn't have to agree with me.
So it's never you kind of being like, it's never you being confrontational. If it does happen, it's usually the person kind of stuck in the ways, because you seem to be more trying to interact with the conversation, to be more civilized and actually hear the ideas out.
I
don't want to put words in your mouth either, so if that's not what it is, please correct me.
I'm not perfect. I will say that. Sometimes I do approach things in like somewhat confrontational of a manner. But I would say that more often than not, I start out trying to understand what a person's trying to say, as opposed to making assumptions about what they're trying to say, and then telling them directly that they're wrong. Like, I feel like in my most successful conversations, where people learn the most or people are most likely to change their minds, which, I don't know, it occasionally happens, it's the ones where I start by asking questions and trying to figure out why they think the way they do. You're just going to cover a lot more ground if you get that out of the way first.
When you've been doing these exercises, have you ever been, prompted with an idea that you never really thought of in the way that someone presented it, and then it kind of made you think about a different approach to your idea, or is it usually just kind of like futile on their part to kind of steer your understanding of whatever topic?
I'm like most people in that I don't often change my mind in those kinds of discussions. But it's not impossible. I mean, like, here's an example. Like, I used to be pretty anti-cannabis. Like, I used to think, oh, well, this is an illicit substance. It should probably be illegal. And that was probably a product of my environment. And I'd say that it was one of the more, one of the more recent political views that I had to update from being a product of my environment. Because now I'm of the position that it doesn't really matter. If we're going to allow people to drink alcohol, and if we're going to allow people to eat bacon or do any number of other things that are bad for them, why not smoking or smoking cannabis? I don't see why that should be treated differently. It's not more or less dangerous than any of those other things. It's what you do with it after you have become a less responsible person, after, having done it. That is really the more relevant thing. So like that was something that I rambled a bit there, but like that was something that I eventually changed my mind about in an argument with somebody, and they presented an argument that's not very different from the one that I just gave. Like I think bacon was the thing that they really that really made the case. Like, we let people, if you wanted to eat a pound of bacon, you could do that, and if you did that every day for 30 years, you would die probably. It's just just how it works. That's heart disease. That's how you get it. Why would we, why can we allow that, but we have to stop people from doing other certain harmful things? I found that a really compelling argument, and I updated my beliefs accordingly.
There's some carnivore diet proponent or out there listening right now, eating bacon, screaming at his phone right now at this conversation.
I mean, I guess if you ate a pound of bacon every day, but you also, exercised and were otherwise eating a relatively healthy diet, you'd be fine. But if you ate a pound of bacon and nothing else,
Yeah.
and also you did not exercise, you would definitely be dead in 30 years.
Yeah.
That would. Yeah.
I wouldn't even say 30.
I'd cut that down. I would put money on that.
Yeah, I'd cut that 30 down quite a bit. But I agree. Yeah, it's very interesting. That's good. I feel like that's very, not responsible, but authentic of you to kind of recognize, oh, I held this belief, and throughout the conversation, it seems like a simple thing, and everyone's gonna be like, oh yeah, it's not that big of a deal, but it kind of is, because we've been kind of talking this whole time more or less about the dogma behind belief systems and how we're so rigid, no matter how outlandish they might seem. You know what I mean? So that step right there, recognizing it to yourself from someone else's idea being presented to you, of being like, oh yeah, I should probably adjust my belief system because they make a very valid argument. I think that's probably one of the most beneficial things humans can do for one another. If nothing else, just actually listen to each other.
Oh yeah, look around you. We live in an amazing civilization where we have buildings and tools, and we're talking on computers, and there's a microphone in front of me which uses a magnet to make an electrical signal out of my voice and transmit it miles and miles and miles away, and then it hits somebody's speaker and they can hear my voice. That is absolutely remarkable. The only way that kind of stuff can happen is because human beings are trading ideas with each other. And at some point, somebody had an idea that somebody else needed to recognize was a good idea.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we're sitting in we're literally in this crazy world talking to microphones with, lizard politicians. It's crazy. It's crazy. But no, it really is. It is absolutely nuts. And I was going for a run before this. That's why we were late. Again, sorry about that. And I was talking with one of my buddies when I was doing it. We kind of just had a discussion with a similar topic. We were talking about... because I made the claim that humans are a byproduct of some type of engineering or some manipulation along the way of some kind. It's strictly based off the fact that how advanced we are compared to everything else, how the size of the human brain practically doubled, if not tripled, in the course of 2 to 3 million years, for no logical reason that we can think of. I mean, yeah, you could say it was the cooking, meat with fire. You can...
Oh, yeah, that's I think...
That's what you believe?
Well, I feel like that's the most recent thing that I've heard that probably contributed a lot. Just a diet that's way higher in protein. If you are in an environment where you have higher access to protein, then by natural selection, you're not going to be weeding out people who are, in a sense, wasting those protein resources on things that were previously unuseful. If they have enough access to protein, you can... you have a couple of luxury items, like in our example, our brain.
That's very valid, very valid. I don't disagree at all, and I'll be honest, this is where I'm very stuck in my ways, because I'm just so, how do I say, I'm very convinced to myself. I've really convinced myself to this point where it's probably a little dangerous, because I'm so convinced of it, opposed to other ideas, that I hear what you're saying. I hear other hypotheses, migration patterns and different area. I've heard different vitamin intakes and eating psychedelic mushrooms could have contributed to it. That's the Terence McKenna one, which I find pretty funny and interesting, but there's a lot of them. But it all stems down to me. It's just why just humans? Why just Homo sapiens? Why just this one sect of primates opposed to every other one ever? Because
I think it applies. I think that there's a couple of ways to look at that. First, it might have happened eventually. If we were stuck on one continent And we never had our age of exploration where if there were never the land bridge between Asia and North America for humans to migrate, and like we stayed on one continent for the entirety of history and never expanded. And then there were some other species on some other continent that also were given enough time that eventually they had that high meat diet, and then they had the luxury of developing more brain and becoming an intelligent species themselves. Like, it might have happened eventually. It's just that we're everywhere and we have an impact on our environment, and our intelligence is a relatively recent thing. Like, our species, I think we're drawing the line at between 100 and 200,000 years ago. That's not actually that much time for evolution for most, I guess, for like most larger species, you know? Like, our brains can like change a bit in that amount of time, but not a ton.
I don't know. I mean, you look at, I'm going to use, what's an example? Göbekli Tepe. I'll use that as an example. Archaeological site discovered in Turkey. It's the most intricate, ancient, aside from the Great Pyramids and probably the Sphinx, it's the most intricate archaeological find in modern history. It dates back to 12,000 plus years ago. Okay, so you're telling me 12,000 years ago, there was, supposedly when there was hunter-gatherers still forming and being in sects of dozens of people at most, they were able to make a bizarre marketplace type area where they were able to carve animals, carve stone away from itself to make animals and art, to have commerce, to have signs of agriculture. That to me says right there that our understanding of history of humanity is flawed. Because the same time frame that we're supposed to be hunter-gatherers, we have signs that we were thriving with agriculture, trade, and domestication of animals and livestock. That's what this stems down to for me, because I think there's a very dogmatic approach when it comes to archaeology and human history in general, because I don't think we give ourselves enough credit for how intelligent we are as a species and for how long. And it all stems back to the fact that I just can't help but think there was interference to teach us said practices, to teach us how to, not teach us how to evolve, but to aid in our growth as a species of some kind. And I'm not saying alien, I'm not saying anything like that.
I don't see the connection, I'm afraid.
Okay.
What is it about this archaeology site that makes you think that there must have been intervention? Like, I feel like you described things that humans are capable of doing.
Yes.
And that we would have been capable of doing for, a couple thousand years. We've been doing that kind of stuff, like making marketplaces in all sorts of places across, like, wherever humans have been. Can you explain a little bit about why that requires some sort of intervention?
Yeah, I apologize if that was a cluster of nonsense. I approached that in a very bad way. What I'm saying is I believe the intervention was in the sense of, first of all, I think the intervention was in early developmental stages. I don't think this was a recent occurrence. I think there could have been different waves of interference and presenting different technology or ideas or manipulating anything personally. But my belief of why this in particular sticks out to me, Göbekli Tepe is an archaeological site that's in Turkey, okay? The age of the site is supposedly around the same exact time where modern humans weren't doing domesticated animal practices. They weren't farming. They weren't doing they weren't trading, but there's intricate art pieces. There's stone columns. There's very, if you go on Google right now, if you're not familiar with Göbekli Tepe, maybe that'd be a good example.
All right,
It's GOB EKLI and then space TEP. And then I just go to images and if anyone listen and see for yourself, but if there's certain images where, there's stone pillars that have engravings of animals in them, but it's not that they were carved into the pillars. The rock was chiseled away from them. So the detail and the sophistication of this site alone contradicts our understanding of the evolution of humanity because we believed, up until right now, we still believe it in a lot of sense, that hunter-gatherers were capable of doing this type of thing based on dating of humans.
Well, I mean, we're talking hunter-gatherers, like, for 100,000 years ago, up until, what is this? 12,000 years ago. I mean, that we're talking about the same species. Like, we're talking about creatures of about the same level of intelligence and abstract reasoning and planning abilities. It's just that with a hunter-gatherer society, they're structured in such a way that they hunt, they gather, they have enough food to feed them, and then they migrate if they need to, like, travel to a different place. You know, that's the theme. It's just the way their society is structured. And then for a situation like this, you know, it just looks like they had a society, and instead of migrating quite as much, they decided, you know what, we're going to settle in this one spot. We have the means, we have the knowledge to make enough food for us in a more sustained way, and we don't really have to migrate around that much. And since that's easier, we're going to stay here. I feel like that makes sense. I don't feel like that requires there to be any intervention of any kind.
It does make sense, and I don't want to discredit what you're saying, because I absolutely agree. It's plausible, and probably equally as plausible, if not more, than what I'm saying. I just, from my understanding of hunter-gatherers, it contradicts their whole lifestyle. When do they have time to do this? When do they have time to develop this very, very intricate practice of this? And if this was their doing, where's the previous evidence of the first, second, third, fourth attempt of this? Who are they trading with? Where's the signs of, what?
There had to have been a first one, right? And I imagine that first one, once you have one settlement, one standard point that people are, gathering around, and you're starting to build a society around a central point instead of being a nomadic society, you just develop on that one point. And so that one area can become pretty complex. Have you seen the YouTube channel Primitive Technology?
Those are the two gentlemen who create things in the forest?
There's one person that I know of, but yeah, like, there are people who use primitive technology. They go into the woods, and some people, like, have an entire series where they just start with nothing, literally nothing, and their first action is to find a rock and roughly grind it into an axe head shape so that they can start harvesting wood to start building an actual axe. And then they'll continue to work on buildings and other kinds of projects. And you can get, like, a lot of really complex structures, like the basics of metallurgy, even just from stuff that you can find in the woods.
I agree, but I think the reason they're able to do this is because of the society we live in, because we have a vast understanding of how to do these things. We didn't have that long.
They know how those things work, but in a society like the one we're looking at, Göbekli Tepe, like, people in that time period just would have passed that information on to each other. Instead of one person reading a bunch of stuff on the internet and going out into the woods, it would have been particularly bright individuals who, like, pass on, or, like, investigative people who pass on that information to the people around them. And then those people, some of them are going to be more inquisitive than others. They're going to find even more discoveries to just add on to that. And it just builds up over time. It's not something that necessarily requires intervention. You can just eventually, like, the same way that anything else is built today. Like, what's something that we're working on right now? SpaceX. We're putting together rockets so that we can go places. There's not, like, one person. There's not, like, one singular society necessarily that has built a rocket. And obviously there must be intervention, because we had this Earth-based society for so long. How did at one point we get rockets so that we could go to other planets or whatever? It was a collective effort, like, humans have the ability to pass on information to each other, so we, pass on knowledge of rocketry. Now we can build a rocket. A bunch of people work on it, and then it works, and it's awesome. Similarly, you have a settlement. Maybe you have one person who's just good at building buildings and knows how to, like, layer tiles so that they can shed water more easily. That person can build a good, decent number of buildings. Maybe you have somebody who's like a particularly skilled hunter. That person can be a part of this as well. You know, you set up camp. If the builder needs any leathers or whatever, you know, they go out, they find something to skin, and then they bring it back for the settlement. You're able to trade that way. It feels like these kinds of things can come together naturally, and that it doesn't require anything special. I mean, except in as much as it's really special that we're a social species and that we do work together in this way. But lots of species are social species.
I guess for me, it comes down to the point of, you know, yeah, we have SpaceX right now. We're making great strides in, you know, innovation of space vehicles and space travel. But there's a linear, visible progression of how we've gotten to where we are now. We can go back and trace every step of the way, every failed attempt, every mishap, every single success. We can go back and see every example of it. My thing with this is we have no proof that these people were capable of doing any of this. Up until this was discovered, we didn't realize they were able to do it. And a lot of people still disbelieve and discount that this is actually legitimate because of it has to be false aging. Basically, is what the hypothesis is now from a lot of skeptics because of how crazy it is for hunter-gatherers to do such a thing. Because we have no progression of their technology, of their artwork, of their anything. You know, they're nomadic peoples who would travel in packs, basically. Gathering off the land, hunting. The women would gather, the men would hunt and come back for a prolonged amount of times and then move on to the next area. That's all we knew. So I don't see any actual progression or history of them evolving, especially because the fact that we didn't know they were capable of doing such a thing to begin with. You know, that's...
Well, okay, so with the SpaceX analogy, you're saying that we have a progression. We can look in and investigate all of the different things that make up our current rockets. And we know how that happened. If tomorrow there were some disaster and 90% of that information were erased, we would still be able to kind of piece together what a rocket is supposed to be. You know, like we'd be able to figure it out kind of post hoc, even without most of the information necessary to build this specific model of rocket. In that situation, it would be a lot like what you're pointing out with this settlement. You know, we're missing most of the information. We don't have that progression. We don't know how that could have been possible. And yet we built something amazing.
I'm trying not to... I'm not trying to just kind of keep bringing up the same talking points. I'm trying to think of different... I agree. I do. And I'm not trying to be stuck in my ways with this. And I should probably explain what my actual belief behind this is before we go any further, because I'm kind of just going in circles here with myself. You're actually giving me actual information. I'm just kind of going on the same patterns. I'm sorry for that. My belief with this is, I'm not saying it's specifically a higher power. I'm not saying it's extraterrestrials. I'm not saying any of that. I'm saying something, in my perspective, seems to have happened. Some sort of transfer of information, some sort of enlightenment, some sort of anything. And the only reason I bring this up is because I think there's a potentiality that it could have been, and I know this is going to sound outlandish, but it could have been a higher consciousness of some kind. It could have been a higher being. I feel like it was kind of adequate to bring it up here. Say that again?
The Akashic Records.
Maybe. I personally don't believe in it. It could be. If it's valid, you know, it's my belief of something doesn't dictate whether it's true or not, so very well could be. That's actually a good explanation. I think, yeah. I think it's equal, if not a little more than the fact that there could have been I'm making a tinfoil hat here, could have been an advanced extraterrestrial race. It could have been an actual act of, let's say, God, of whatever energy type of thing. I didn't really bring it up to debate the validity of it, and I'm sorry if I kind of made it seem like that was what it was. I kind of just wanted your opinion on it more than anything, and I started ranting about it. Sorry.
That's fine. Okay, so I guess I'll condense my opinion down a little bit. I would approach this situation the same way that I would approach most other topics of conversation, any other discoveries, etc. I look at this and I see, oh, this maybe changed our mind about when people stopped being as much hunter-gatherer societies and started focusing more on settlements. We have an earlier example now of a human settlement, and this kind of changes our ideas. By default, I don't suspect anything strange happened. I just assumed that what happened here is exactly the same stuff that we were expecting happened, what we would have thought was 2,000 years after this, or whenever the next earliest settlement was, or previously known. I think that when I look at a settlement like this, I might be able to use my layman understanding to piece together an explanation of how this can happen. And most of it's not that extraordinary. Like, I think, oh yeah, we build settlements. This makes sense. They built settlements. That makes sense. It's not like there's like spaceship parts in this settlement. If there were spaceship parts in this settlement, that would be very, very strange. Or if there were like organic material that wasn't from any known Earth organism, that would be pretty strange as well. And those would be very good bases for saying, oh, there was alien intervention. But we don't see those kinds of things. We just see the same kinds of stuff that we already knew that humans were capable of doing. Like, if society collapsed today and we needed to go like off into the wilderness in small tribes, we would be able to piece together something very much like this without much effort, even though most of that information has been lost. Like, can you think of a single person who knows how to make clay tiles in your personal life?
Yeah, but these aren't clay tiles. I mean, this is like 3D.
Do you know
art.
Anybody who knows how to cut stone?
Yes, I do. I'm sure I could.
Without electricity.
I also don't know someone who can lift a 50-ton boulder and put it 10 feet in the air, though, without machinery. I don't know anyone who could do that. But they did it Göbekli Tepe somehow. No, I don't. Stonehenge is whatever. I don't find it nearly as interesting as this or the anything in the Giza Plateau or anything like that. But there's a couple boulders in pieces of rock in Göbekli Tepe that are perched up on other pieces of stone that are weigh tens of tons. Because when you said if you saw metal chaparral or something like that, or any sign of advanced intervention, then you kind of change your stance a little bit, maybe. I don't think I need that personally because of how sophisticated I think this is. Because listen, I could find someone to cut metal or to make tablets. I probably couldn't find someone to make a perfect 3D carving out of stone of animals. I probably couldn't find someone in my everyday life to lift a boulder that weighs multiple tens of tons and perch it on other boulders. I probably couldn't do that.
Do you think that if society collapsed tomorrow and we had to go into the middle of nowhere and we had to start humanity over from 100 lay people who don't have any expertise of any kind, that if we had a need to do those things, after a couple of generations, we'd figure out a way?
I don't think after a couple generations, no. I think it would take a very long time to do what they did. I really do, and I'm not trying to. I'm not trying to sound like a jerk.
How many generations do you think it would take?
Say that again?
How many generations do you think it would take for us to rediscover the technology necessary to put a boulder on top of another in a high place, or to rebuild the pyramids? Like, there's all sorts of ancient stuff that there's a little bit of uncertainty about how they were made specifically because that information has just. We've just lost it.
Well, the pyramids in particular, it was built. It was built in like. Possible. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry, I was just talking over you.
Those things are physically possible. Like, we could re-engineer some things to redo it. It doesn't seem too far-fetched to me that we invented it the first time.
I mean, the Great Pyramids built in like 2500 something BC. Cleopatra's born in like 70 BC. She was closer to the creation of the iPhone than she was to that. That's how old we're talking. I feel like that's very understated because that's a monumental undertaking to make the things that they did. To make the Sphinx.
Oh, it's remarkable, for sure. I'm not saying it's a trivial task. Like, by no means. Like, I'm not trying to downplay how cool the pyramids are, or how awesome it is that we have these remains from Göbekli Tepe. I'm not gonna I'm not gonna be able to pronounce that
Nah,
correctly
you're
for the
good.
first
It
10
took
times.
me a while.
But like, I'm not trying to downplay the significance of these things, but on the other hand, humans did it, and humans are pretty resourceful. We're capable of inventing all sorts of really cool stuff. And just because we don't know the specifics of how they did it, we do know that they're doing physically possible stuff. And they probably had a way to do it.
I'm not the type of guy who thinks the pyramids were built by aliens. I'm not that type of guy. I don't think they personally like came down and like, okay, here you go, and zapped into creation. Personally, I can't wrap my head around how we messed up this badly in understanding what our past civilizations were capable of up until very recently, and how we still neglect to realize how sophisticated they were. We
weren't as globalized previously. Like, pick a century.
11th century.
1100. In 1100, do you think that there could have existed an academic literature about what civilizations 9,000 years ago looked like in Turkey?
Probably not.
That wouldn't have been thinkable. They might not even have known that Turkey existed. Like, some scholars might have had maps. They might have merchants who've like traveled really far, but like, that's not the kind of information that was just readily available to everybody. It's not the kind of thing that every scholar was studying. It wasn't like, without even knowing how old a certain thing was, they were able to say, oh, that's old. And that's about it. They wouldn't have, they wouldn't have been able to tell you that this was 9,000 years old. They didn't have the tools for that. 1800s. Like, also, like, we didn't have all of the tools necessary to tell you how old this was. Like, we could have looked at it and we could have said, oh, that's pretty old. We might even have been able to look at it and say, we know that is older than 1000 BC. But we wouldn't have necessarily known that it was 9000 BCE. Like, that technology is relatively recent. Like, I assume that they used radiometric dating to figure out how old this stuff was. That's only something that existed after we discovered radioactive materials, which has only been for like 100 years or so.
What? I'm not. How does that connect to the scenario we were talking about prior? Though I'm just a little. I'm trying to connect the lines there.
I'm sorry. I did go a bit off the beaten path.
No, you're good. You're good. I didn't mean it in like an offensive way. I'm just trying to draw the connection there.
So you said that you didn't understand how we could have gotten at this wrong. Like, how we got it so wrong about how people were behaving in 9,500 BCE. But we only had the tools to even know what was going on in 9,500 BCE, or to know that was the year, for the past 120 years or so. And there's a lot of world to cover. Like, it's not like, oh, we've known about radioactivity for 100 years. We should have known pretty quickly that this was in 9,500 BCE, and we should have had an answer pretty quickly. It takes time to investigate all of these places. Like,
okay.
We've only recently been able to discover that this was a thing at all.
I'll show you another example real quick. Ancient Sumer. There's tablets that show the correct order of planetary bodies in our solar system based on size, all in a heliocentrical model of the solar system as well. How do you explain that without actual because I know you're gonna say it was just humans are smarter than we think than we give credit for, but at the same time, this is the first modern credited civilization. Like, this, Sumer is it. This is it. Mesopotamia is the origin of modern society, and they had a mapping of our solar system. When I see things like this, when I see Göbekli Tepe, when I see things that are so outlandishly impossible to me, not even just because of our understanding, just based on the sheer fact of how rapidly all this arose, I can't help, as a person who believes in some of these ideas to begin with, think that there was intervention from some sort of external force. And again, God, extraterrestrial, whatever it is, I don't think this is solely humanity.
What is it about a heliocentric model of the solar system that makes you think that there must have been an intervention?
It's not the heliocentrical model. It's that's part of it. But the biggest thing is the fact that they had all of the planetary bodies, all the planets aligned around the sun in a perfect sequence of sizes. They knew the exact locations of every planet according to size. They messed up though. I'll be honest. They added one extra planet to the solar system. That's the one thing they messed up on. I assume they interpreted the moon as something like that. I don't know if you've ever seen the tablets of this. I don't know if this is like just something I'm kind of.
I mean, I know that the heliocentric model of the solar system is way older than Copernicus. Like, there were some. I know that there were some Greeks who proposed that the sun was the center.
Yeah, but this is long before
and
Greeks.
I guess it goes all the way back to Sumer. But I don't find that surprising. I feel like that's like to their credit, it does kind of look like the Earth is the center of the universe when you look up, right? So I feel like it definitely took more thought than just using your eyes. They're able to, take information and reconcile that information through abstract reasoning, and that is impressive. I'm not trying to discount the accomplishment, but like, why is that more amazing than like any other scientific discovery?
To be honest with you, it's probably the most profound one I've ever heard of the ancient world. And I'm not being I'm being sincere. Due to the fact that they knew the size of every single planet in the correct order that they appear. If you gave me seven,
that they knew the sizes of the planets.
Oh, I'll get you a photo of it right now. I'll find it. Hold on one sec. Sumerian tablet of solar system. 1 second here.
So that's another thing. Like, when I hear something grand, a grand claim like that, I do default to skepticism. It's not just that they have a heliocentric model of the solar system. Okay, I can accept that. That seems like a pretty straightforward thing. Like, that doesn't surprise me at all. That doesn't trigger my skepticism response. But the statement that they knew the sizes of the planets, that does trigger my skepticism response.
Understandably,
so, like,
because it seems impossible. So I respect that.
I do question the sources here.
Okay. I respect your skepticism for sure. Like, I absolutely do. I mean, I can show you Washington Post, History Channel, NBC News, British Museum. There's a few different sources for this one.
Sumerian. So, I mean, I feel like I did just Google and see the same thing, but I don't see anything about the size of the planets.
I sent you it on Discord, and I'll leave the picture and the link of this video for everyone if they want to see it as well. If you look at the next to the two gentlemen on the left, in between those two gentlemen, the picture I sent on Discord, there's obviously the sun with the rays around it, the traditional sense of how we see it, and then there's planetary bodies around it, perfectly aligned with the sizes of the planets. You can see the different distinctions of sizes of them.
I am having difficulty seeing your picture. It's very small.
Oh, sorry about that.
Never mind.
I can send you the link to the thing if that's easier. That's probably a better idea. Sorry.
Oh, those are not to scale. Okay, I see it now. Those are not planets to scale.
How so?
Oh, I just know the scale of the planets. There's like 1 billion YouTube videos for it.
Okay.
For example, I would expect 2 of them to be pretty much exactly the same size, Venus and Earth. I would expect there to be 2 that are a bit smaller than that for Mars and Venus. And then I would expect 1 giant one, one that's like 70% of its size. And then we didn't discover Uranus for quite a while, right? Yeah. So I would expect these to be much more varied in size.
Honestly, as you're saying that, I'm looking at them. I'm seeing that personally. The one on the bottom left, right next to the gentleman's nose and mouth, that seems like the largest one, and then the one right above it, gradually smaller. The 2 on the right bottom, those look pretty much equal to Earth and I believe you said Venus. I'm not familiar with the sizes. I literally haven't looked. I haven't looked into this since I realized it, found out about it in a while. But to me, just from you probably know far more, but from my understanding, it looks pretty accurate to what you just described to me, in a sense.
Hold on. I'm gonna look up a quick figure real quick.
Yeah, absolutely. Please.
All right, here's another fact. Around 1,000 Jupiters could fit into the sun. When I look at this diagram, I do not see a sun that is 1,000 times the size of Jupiter. So it's not that they're getting the sizes right. Maybe they got the number of some planets right. Maybe they were able to figure out, oh, the best explanation for this is that these are all orbiting around the sun instead of everything orbiting around the Earth with their little epicycles in the Ptolemaic model. You know, like that maybe they piece together, oh, there's a heliocentric model of the solar system. This is the best way to account for what we're seeing. But I absolutely do not buy the idea that they got the sizes right. This does not look correct at all.
Okay, let's get rid of the size thing then. Fine. If I was wrong, no, I didn't mean like an apprehensive way. Okay, I agree, for sure. Hypothetically, I agree. I don't know enough. I'd have to like look into it again. I probably spoke out of my ass with that one, to be honest. They have it. They have an heliocentrical model. They have the planets, though. This is the first recorded civilization, advanced civilization, like of modern day society that we are aware of. How did they get this information? How do you go from hunter-gatherer to this? How do you go from hunter-gatherer, traditional sense, to Göbekli Tepe, to the... How did these just arise? How do we get this so drastically wrong? I agree that it's hard to see the history, as you made the metaphor earlier, which was a very good comparison. I agree. I don't see how some of these things... I see how they're possible without intervention. I just think it's the most logistical reason. We're in an infinite void of practically nothingness in this universe. It's, by comparison, it's mainly empty, and there's a ridiculous amount of congestion at the same time, but a lot of it's just empty space. But there's a ton of planets and galaxies, black holes, things that are infinitely large, constantly expanding, that we have no actual understanding of in any sense. So I think when we look at these things and we won't even recognize the fact that it could have been an intervention to some scale, I mean, just because we haven't seen an alien or a UFO or God present themselves on the lawn of the White House, I think it's kind of crazy in a sense.
Well, I don't think it's... So taking a step back, first, even if we didn't have good explanations, I don't feel like the next most logical jump is there's no way that this could have happened by natural means. I don't feel like that's our starting point. You know, I feel like you should at least try to find some natural means as your first mode of action. Like, here's an example. Let's say that tomorrow we saw a really weird phenomenon in the sky. It is a glowing and expanding orb, and then it contracts over the course of a couple of hours, and it's just hanging out in the sky. It's not in the atmosphere, it's out of the atmosphere, and it's just like glowing, and it's expanding and contracting on some kind of chaotic pattern. Okay, what's our first guess for that?
As an everyday person?
Yeah.
Probably UFO. The majority of people would just assume.
So you know what? That makes sense to me. Because I think, yeah, aliens could exist. I think that that is a natural phenomenon, and that is one of the things that we could look at as an explanation for what we're seeing. Here's another thing that I think that we could look at for what we're seeing. It could be some weird astronomical body that we did not account for before, and that it's just new. Maybe there is a new cloud of plasma that is starting to spark in our solar system. Obviously, this would upset our model of how star formation works, but it is possible that we don't understand perfectly, and that there's another phenomenon that's unaccounted for, and that we would expand our knowledge of how stars form with. Right? That's another thing that's possible. We'd have to investigate those before we jump to either one as conclusions. You know, like, or some people, I bet you a lot of people would say, oh, you know what that is? That's an angel. A lot of people would just jump to the conclusion that's not an alien. That is not a ball of plasma. That is an angel. That is an extra-dimensional being that is a paragon of good and fights on the side of God. Right? A lot of people are going to make that guess. I also don't think that that's the best first guess. I feel like we should go with one of the other two first. Now, it could be. I mean, I'm not saying that I would completely rule it out, but I would expect there to be a good reason to think that that's true before we entertain it for more than like 5 minutes. With that said,
Yeah, go ahead.
when we see weird things like, oh, ancient Sumer, they've got a heliocentric model of the solar system. Oh, that's a weird phenomenon. They pieced together that the sun was the center of the universe, and that was their best guess before anybody else did. We have a couple of competing ideas for how that happened. Number one, they were simply the first to guess that the sun was the center of the solar system. Okay, that's possible. Guess number two. Some kind of intervention. Aliens, angels, demons, God, whatever. Some kind of intervention gave humans knowledge that they could not have arrived at by any other means.
Real quick. I have to know. Do you hold aliens in the same regard as angels and demons? As like as
no.
logistical beings? No. Okay.
I think the aliens are more likely.
Okay.
Just because the universe is vast.
Yes.
We already know that there's one planet with life on it. There's probably another planet with life on it.
Well, we know of two. Mars did sustain life at one point in the past. There's frozen water. There's signs of, a faint atmosphere. So there's very plausible reasons to think there was life, if not proven there was, based on those, probably in more alone. But
well, there is. Okay, two. Let's assume.
I don't mean to pick straws. I'm sorry. That was yeah. Sorry.
But we know that aliens are like a possibility. Because there could be exactly this thing happening on Earth right now. It's just that it happens elsewhere. Whether you think that it was alien intervention that caused life on Earth to be as grand as it is right now, or not, it could have happened on another planet. Or if you think that God created everything on Earth and created everything the way that you see right now, could have done it on another planet as well. Regardless, it is possible that aliens, no matter which of these many things is true, aliens are a possibility in there. So aliens are kind of a common idea. That works as a possible explanation. It's not likely as an explanation for a lot of situations. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that it's likely that aliens are responsible for anything that we have ever seen. But the idea that they're out there is reasonable. We just haven't necessarily found them yet. Or some people believe that we have found them and that we're covering it up. Angels and demons, on the other hand, these are very strange things. We're not talking about something that can naturally arise. Angels and demons can only exist in some kind of theological framework where there's a supernatural existence that's real. So there's a more limited scope for angels and demons being a reasonable explanation for what we're seeing. That's my summary of angels, demons, and aliens.
Well, I agree with it. I'm not gonna lie. You said at one point in particular that was kind of my whole rationale for bringing up. Believe it or not, the last half hour that I've digressed this conversation, it was all for literally one actual point that I really let myself get away with. And I apologize for the derailing. But you brought up the fact of either more. I'm just gonna paraphrase you. You said either we're the only life form or basically we're not. There could be aliens. The reason I brought this up is to say, because coming from an atheist perspective, I thought this would be an interesting kind of thing to ask you is, if we are the only sentient being in the whole universe that is capable of doing what we do to the extent that we do it, no aliens at all, doesn't that make you entertain the fact of God in any regard? No, it doesn't, but I'm not saying it should, but I'm curious. Does that make you entertain it at all if we're totally proven that there's no other life anywhere? Does that do anything to make you think that there's a higher power somehow?
That's a good question. That might be a decent indicator. I would say that we're pretty far away from ruling it out. But if we turned out to be the only life in the universe, that would, in a pretty important way, make Earth remarkable. At the very least, it would make Earth or the solar system or the galaxy remarkable. Yeah, it's hard to say. I don't actually know. It's another thing where let's say that tomorrow we magically knew that there was no other life in the universe. It's also possible that we were just the first life in the universe. That's a possibility. Pretty unlikely, to be frank, but I don't know. It's something that we should consider. Whether there's a higher power behind it, yeah, I mean, like, I feel like that does make that a little bit more likely. Sure.
Okay, now let's do the opposite here. If we were proven with the fact that there is a plethora of infinite other life forms out there, some similar to us, some not, because I like the distinction between some humanoid, some not, because that, I feel like for a lot of people that would be the turning point of being like, okay, maybe God isn't real because why are they all different? You know what I mean? So say there's a plethora of other species of aliens. We have actual concrete evidence. They come down, they communicate. We start trading with other planets. If you're in an agnostic mindset, does that make you fully discount, and this is hypothetical, of course, would that make you fully discount the existence of a God if you were on the spectrum of believing or not believing, like you personally?
No, not fully. I feel like it would make the existence of a God slightly less likely. But like, there's a lot of things that kind of just chip away at the likelihood of a God existing. That would just be one drop in the bucket. But I would not say that it rules it out entirely.
Fair
like
enough.
It could, like, as I just mentioned, like, whether a God exists or not, like, let's say that a God does exist. That God could have created life on Earth as well as on other planets. There's nothing that rules that out. Especially if you're Mormon.
Yeah, I don't know much about Mormonism, and what I do is very very biased and offensive, so I'm not even going to chime in on them as a collective because I don't want to be that guy. Yeah. Did they believe that personally, that there's like other planets that were made by God and whatnot? Is that one of their beliefs?
It's a little bit more complicated and not as explicitly stated. So I don't remember which book this was. This might not be the Book of Mormon. It might have been one of Joseph Smith's other works. So please forgive me if you're a Mormon listener. I don't know the full details, but God or some of the divine presences are supposed to live on a star called Kolob. So they do acknowledge at least one other extraterrestrial realm called Kolob where God exists, or angels exist, or like holy souls exist.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. One more hypothetical here that kind of connects to all this, and that would just be say that, again, obviously big hypothetical, extraterrestrial life comes down, intelligent extraterrestrial life comes down. It presents the notion that it was, in fact, the mastermind. Have you ever seen Prometheus? Like that movie?
I was kind of messed up when I watched Prometheus. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, fair enough. That's a good way to watch it. Well, the opening scene, I don't know if you remember the alien. He basically commits suicide. I didn't want to say the suicide because YouTube hates that word. It basically commits suicide and pours its blood and body into a waterfall and a valley, a stream of water. And what that does is it seeds humanity.
Oh, yeah. That's where like the black shit like infects everything, right?
Yeah, it's like an offset of like the Alien franchise, I think it is.
Yeah, okay, I remember that scene.
So let's say hypothetically that's what happened. Aliens come down, they show us in our heads or whatever, or on our TV, whatever. They find some way to show us that they tampered with human development and fully created us. Would you accept that as a fact? Or would you, how would you perceive that? Like, would that be a better rationale for you to understand and accept than, like, an all-powerful being that, is just existing in the sky and whatnot?
Well, I would expect them to be able to come up with some examples, and I would expect us to be able to verify those examples.
How would we go about verifying such a thing? Like, if and I know that this is obviously hypothetical, so yeah.
I'm not sure. Maybe like okay, so here's a really, really wacky science fiction kind of way that this could work. Let's say that aliens come, they visit Earth, and they show us through a portal what Göbekli Tepe looked like in the year 5499 BCE. And human beings were like, we were there, but we were hunter-gatherers, and we were not capable of using stone-cutting tools. Like we had no means of doing any of these things. And then they also showed us through that same portal into the past, their spaceship coming down and then showing human beings how to cut stone and make different kinds of carvings. And then now this coheres with our idea of what's happening at Göbekli Tepe. If they showed us that, that would be a good example to show us, hey, this is where we intervened. This is something that you should be able to verify with your own archaeology, is a pretty important site to you humans. Here you are. We are interveners in your history to try to make you a more intelligent species. That would be one way that I could see them presenting an example, assuming that that was the example.
That's pretty valid.
But like, if they're intelligent and they actually are intervening in human affairs, I would expect them to not only be able to describe where they intervened, but also why they intervened there and in those ways. And I would expect that as intelligent beings, we would be able to understand the rationale there, that it wouldn't just be something absurd, and that it would make sense to us.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the same understanding in a sense, because that's kind of what it boils down to for me, is I believe there's a chance that something along these lines could happen or take place in the past, but it boils down to why us, why do they give a shit enough? And it's always been, to me, it's okay, maybe they are just what we think of as God, maybe that's what happens when a species becomes so advanced and doesn't deal with cataclysms that are catastrophic to the species. They don't infight between the species. They don't create nuclear weapons. They don't do any of these things. Maybe this is what happens after millions or hundreds of thousands of years of development of a species. Maybe they just start seeding life. That's how I always kind of see it, opposed to just an all-powerful being type of thing.
Yeah, if you just imagine human beings in a couple million years, if we make it, traveling the stars, a lot of us are just going to be bored.
Yeah.
And if we find, let's say that we find aliens and we have intergalactic contact, and we've all done that, we're interacting with aliens, blah, 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 blah. We're not alone in the universe. Hooray. If we find more aliens, I don't know, maybe we just help them instead of just trying to establish trade with them. I feel like there's a lot of stuff that we could do that's just I don't know, for fun. Or maybe some bad actors could find that alien civilization and just decide to mess with them for no reason. I could see that kind of thing happening. The most important thing to me, though, is there any good reason for us to think that that did happen in this situation?
Fair enough. Yeah, I obviously you approach things much more rational. And I'll be straight up than I do. Mine's usually marijuana induced thoughts that I think about when I'm sober. I'm yeah, it's not a bad idea, and I kind of just build it around that. Which I appreciate these types of conversations with people who have much more sophisticated approaches sometimes. But I find it interesting how, especially coming from the atheist perspective, I know people are probably why is this guy talking to an atheist about freaking aliens? But I feel like this is one of the best types
if you have that question and you're listening, it's because aliens are cool.
Yeah,
that's why.
Thank you. I just feel I just think it all connects in the sense that I think that it's more plausible than than God. I think aliens creating civilizations is much more rational than just a being who snaps his fingers into existence, a whole infinite universe. I think that's ridiculously more rational. So this kind of segues into my other outlandish, maybe how you perceive it, idea. I think this one's even more plausible than alien intervention. Simulation theory. What are your thoughts?
Oh, I feel like a lot of people misunderstand the simulation argument.
Okay.
So here's the simulation argument in a nutshell. One of these three things is true. Either human beings or a species as intelligent as human beings are unlikely to make it to a stage of development where they can start simulating universes, or Wait, hold on. I'm leaving one of these things out. I'm gonna cheat. I'm gonna go ahead and look it up.
No worries.
Like, all right, here we go. All right. This is by Nick Bostrom. This is the Philosophical Quarterly 2003 article, and I think I'm looking at the abstract. Right. He argues that at least one of the following things is true. Either the human species is likely to go extinct before reaching a post-human stage, which is the thing that I was trying to describe first, or two, and any post-human civilization is extremely unlikely to run a significant number of simulations of their evolutionary history, or three, we are almost certainly living in a computer simulation. One of those three things is true. The conclusion of the argument isn't that we are living in a simulation. It is, if we're interested in simulating our evolutionary history, and if we are able to run a lot of simulations of our evolutionary history in order to look like the universe that we're seeing today with a fine amount of detail, then it's more likely that we're living in a simulation.
So that's what you accept? Like, that's what you believe, I mean, out of that?
Well, yeah, one of those three things is true.
No,
I don't know which three.
one
I do question a little bit occasionally, like, which of these three things is most likely. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. It seems pretty clear to me. I understand the argument. Yeah, I like it.
So, if you had a gun to your head, someone says you believe in God or simulation theory, you go with simulation theory.
I'd probably lean simulation theory. Yeah. It's not. So I don't think that it's likely per se. I think that by far the most likely one is number two. The post-human civilization is unlikely to run a significant number of simulations of their evolutionary history. I think that, like, even if we have the ability to simulate things, it is unlikely that they would be as fine-grained as the reality that we're able to see.
How so? You don't think to be able to simulate the reality to the T they do is what you mean, or
at least unable to simulate, to run enough simulations to produce the intelligent life and the degree that we're seeing. Yeah.
But I think
that it's like a hard problem. Like, it's easy to talk about simulating a universe, but, like, think about what that would actually require. I mean, I know that we're talking about a, quote, post-human civilization, unquote, but so they're going to have technology that we can't even conceive of. But at the same time, like, what would it even take to simulate an entire universe? Again, keeping in mind the fact that they do exist in some kind of universe.
Brother, we do it. We do it every day with video games. I mean, there's a lot of video games that we have made that, you know, it doesn't render the field of view until you actually reach a certain parameter, and then when you reach it, the field of view that was previously behind you disappears until you go backwards. So I don't think the computing power is that overwhelmingly necessary. I think it's capable to do it. I think the hardest thing would be to simulate consciousness that we seem to possess. But, like, when it comes down to the you know,
video games don't. Like, the modeling that you see in video games is not the same caliber as simulating a universe. Like, what did you have a specific video game in mind?
No, I wasn't thinking of a let's say Minecraft. If you turn down the graphics settings on Minecraft, it won't render your field of view too far. You have to up it. How is that different than what could be happening now? Because we're stationary where we are.
So let's look at Minecraft as a universe and compare the quality of that model to the reality that we're able to observe. Right. The current universe, like at least the level of simulation that you and I exist in, for the appropriate metaphor, things are made out of particles, and those particles sometimes behave like waves. Mm-hmm. Those things are extremely small. You and I are made out of trillions and trillions and trillions of them. And in addition, all of this empty space around us, like look around the room. Whatever room that you're sitting in, look around it, look wall to wall, ceiling to floor, all of that empty space. is not empty space. There are trillions and trillions and trillions of particles all around you, and a bunch of different kinds of particles too. Like there's oxygens in there, hydrogens, carbon, argon, and a bunch of other trace gases. Like there's all sorts of different stuff, even in the empty space. Going back to Minecraft, if you are sitting in your house, kindly made out of dirt, and you look wall to wall, ceiling to floor, there's just empty space in there. There is a, quote, air block, but it's not particles. Like, it's not that the air is interacting with it. Your character doesn't interact with those air blocks in order to, like run biological processes. It's not using the oxygen for something that's happening within your character model to keep you alive. It's just there, and if you are in air, then you don't need to resurface to breathe. If you go underwater, you start suffocating, for anybody who doesn't play Minecraft.
Okay, correct me if I'm wrong here. Particles only act like waves when they're observed, right? If they're stationary and there's no observation being attended to it, they don't move at all. They're stationary. Is that theoretical, or has that been proven? Because I know that's kind of an understanding of it, in a sense that if you're not observing particles, they're not actually moving. They're not in a wave formation. They're stationary. Isn't that sort of rendering? Like
the short answer is it's complicated.
As scientists always say.
If we're not observing it, then we don't know what shape it is, right? We just can't know what shape it is. Maybe it is just a particle. Maybe it always acts like a wave, whether we're observing it or not. Maybe it actually always acts like a particle, but it's just a fundamental fact that when you make certain kinds of measurements, they're wavy instead of in particle form. Like, there's evidence against that last interpretation from, the double slit experiment, where we only run like one electron through the slit array at a time, and they still interfere with themselves. But it's complicated. It might be that they're always waves, whether we're observing them or not. It might be that they switch back and forth. It's pretty uncertain.
Yeah, that might be what I'm liking, because it proves not proves, but it kind of shows the similarity. That's like, if we're not observing said things, you compare that to it not rendering, kind of. Because why use the computing power to do something that no one's seeing? Why put the energy and the effort into it if it's not necessarily like a necessity? Unless it needs to be. So it's not necessary to render something in Minecraft 17 miles away. That cave with spiders in it, it's not rendered yet, because there's no reason for it to. But when you get, a mile away, it is.
I mean, what do you mean by observing? Like, is any kind of interaction an observation?
Well, that's the question, because I think that's how it is. Is a video camera, is that observation? Is it physically eyeballs? Is it being with binoculars? I don't know how it works, to be honest with you. I know the basic foundational, the double slit. I'm aware of that, but I know that particles act like waves. But when I thought it was a fact, I didn't know it was really a theory. So that I'm wrong in. But I thought that when they weren't being observed, that they were just stationary, opposed to wave-like. I didn't know it was theoretical though. So I'm just
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. There are a couple of different models. Models isn't the right word. What is the interpretations of quantum mechanics? But I'm not super familiar with them. I just never really had to use them. But with respect to like observations, like we have a gravity wave detector that we use to observe different kind of black hole systems. Because if two black holes are orbiting each other rapidly, they produce gravity waves, which is super cool. And we have large detectors which pick up differences in gravity waves, so that we can see what's going on with those kinds of systems. If we can detect gravity waves, doesn't that kind of mean that we're observing all of the universe all the time?
I don't know. I don't know enough, and I'm not going to talk on my butt right here, to be honest with you. I don't know. My understanding of this goes extensively to the knowledge I've heard Sean Carroll explain it, the physicist, which a physicist studying, quantum mechanics and atoms is kind of funny, but that's pretty much my only knowledge, so I'm not going to try to act like I know more than I do. So yeah, that's all I really, I guess I'm trying to throw shit at the wall and see if it sticks, to be honest.
Oh yeah, these are fun topics. I definitely agree with you there. I don't know. I feel like I usually have like a. I feel like a major difference in like our views is that I have like a cutoff pretty quickly in terms of like interestingness and how much I need evidence in order to believe that interesting thing. Like if something is a little bit too interesting, then I would expect to be presented with a little bit stronger evidence in order to believe it, if that makes sense.
Oh,
Like,
dude, I will absolutely look at any presentation by anybody anytime and hear it out fully and then look into it. I'll accept everything as reality in the sense of, like, I'm not going to go around preaching about it, but I'll envision it as if it is absolutely true to see how it, like, kind of, how my brain goes with it, then go from there. I think we have different approaches for sure. You're definitely more scientifically oriented, which I respect and shit, but yeah.
I mean, I guess I kind of do the same thing. Like, oh, if this thing is true, then what do we make of that fact? So like, I don't know, like in a religious context, here's a thing. I was recently in a conversation. It was about abortion, and somebody said that as a Christian, they believe that abortion is murder because of a passage in the Bible that says that John the Baptist leapt in the womb. And so they know that life begins at conception. Okay. Do you have any thoughts about that before I continue?
No, I'm just put it on the table. I'm pretty against abortion, but just from that metric of basis, that sounds kind of crazy to me. Just basing something off a text written by man that is supposed to be the word of God, but has been revived countless times by man. Seems a little redundant, but okay, I can vibe with it, I guess. But I don't agree with that foundational belief of it. But
for the purposes of a conversation, it wouldn't be very productive for me to say, you know what, I think that verse is stupid and that you shouldn't believe it, and so you should not be against abortion for this reason. You should either find a different reason or not be against abortion. I didn't start there. Instead, I felt like a better starting point was to just say, okay, let's assume that this is true. If this is true, that still doesn't mean that life begins at conception. Because we're in the womb for 9 months. It could very easily be true. Like, let's say that passage is true. Let's say that the Bible is the word of God, etc. Using that as a starting point, and then also saying, okay, gestation is about 9 months. Where in that are we able to conclude that life begins at conception? That doesn't follow. It just doesn't follow from those two premises. And if you look at some traditions, like in Islam, there's the belief that we get a soul in the womb at 120 days. Cool. I think that that's kind of interesting. I don't necessarily believe that that's any more or less valid, but like, I think that that's an interesting thing. If that were true, though, it would be perfectly consistent with the passage that we were just talking about, because all that tells us is that John the Baptist was at least 120 days old in the womb. It doesn't necessarily mean that life begins at conception. It could just as easily be that life begins at 120 days. So I feel like, it was just as arbitrary as before the discussion. So that's in the context of taking an idea and saying, oh, this is true, at the very least for now, and then just seeing what you can do with that idea. I also really like doing that.
I feel like this is one of the abortion things I just thought about real time when you said it. I feel like, and I don't even want to get into an abortion conversation because I feel like that's way too sidetracking from what we're talking about. So I'll just briefly go over this, and you can say what your thing. We can move on if we wanted to. But I feel like saying like we're not sure if life begins in conception is kind of like being like, yeah, I don't know if this guy murdered somebody, but we're gonna kill him anyway because he could have. So I think it's kind of just like, yeah, we can't prove it, but we can't disprove it, but we're still gonna do it. I just kind of feel like it's like I don't know. It's because I'm looking at both perspectives here. I'm not Republican. I am what I am. But I have the belief of anti-abortion in most cases. But it's like, I can see the other side argument. I understand it, but at the same time, it's like if you can't prove it either way, it could be murder based on our understanding of life, or it could not be. So it's like you're kind of just saying fuck it either way. I feel like.
I mean, we do that all the time, though, right? Like people eat meat. Those animals were alive. And the question isn't whether they were alive. The question is whether we have to care.
Yeah, but you're not understanding. As humans, we're the most important thing ever. I'm just kidding. That's how people see things, though. If you're not a human, your being doesn't matter unless you're a pet. So I understand. It's nuts.
Well, so whether souls exist or not. So maybe a person believes in souls. If souls exist, and people get their souls at conception, then yeah, maybe abortion is a bad thing. Like that's possible in that model. Or if people get their souls at 120 days, maybe abortion before 120 days is perfectly acceptable, but maybe abortion after 120 days is unacceptable. That's also possible. You know, like we can toy around with different ideas. I don't believe in souls, though. Like, okay. I'm not saying, I wouldn't say that in order to be an atheist, you can't believe in souls, but I happen to not believe in souls. And I feel like most atheists don't. So what makes murder wrong? Murder is wrong, not because you are removing somebody's soul from their body. They get to control how and when they're alive, and you don't get to mess with that. It's not within your rights to change what somebody else's life is, you know, to make them not alive. That's not your right. So at what point does that become relevant? Some people think, oh, well, a plant is alive, but it's okay to eat plants. Okay, makes sense to me. What is it that makes us different from plants? Well, we have memories. We respond to our surroundings in a more deep way. And, you know, there's some differences. Maybe those are the differences. Okay. And then you can start asking similar questions about animals. Like, oh, well, what is it that makes you think that you can eat some animals, but not others?
I'm not sure if you can hear me. Kind of broke up there, though. We'll give him a second here. I'm not sure if internet cut out or whatnot. Damn, he was getting into deep stuff there, too. Fuck. That's unfortunate. I'll show him a message. Hey, kid. Oh, there we go. What are we doing here? Oh! Freaking Discord, man. Freaking Discord. Alright, I'm going to pause this real quick, guys, and we'll be right back when we figure this out. So, real quick, be right back. Okay, sorry about that. For people listening, it's literally nothing. It's just, obviously, it's just like, picks right back up, but okay. Sorry about that, guys. Go ahead. Sorry.
So, the topic is on abortion. And if souls exist, then depending on when the soul enters the human body, maybe a person believes that abortion is ethical or unethical, depending on when it is. But I don't believe in souls. So here's what I care about. I care about when something is able to form memories, respond to its environment, and feel pain. And you can ask those questions for all sorts of different life forms. You can ask that question about humans. Okay, hopefully you answer yes for all three of them. For the vast majority of humans, and for the ones who don't, like, don't mess with them. They didn't do anything to you. And then for plants, right? Plants don't form memories. You know, they do respond to their environment. They don't really feel pain. They do have like some signals that get thrown out when they're injured or whatever, but most of those are for the purposes of repair or alerting other plants. And our understanding, if they do feel pain, is very poor. Animals do feel pain. They form memories, and they respond to their environment. A fetus, at the very least in the first couple of weeks of pregnancy, does none of those things. It does not form memories. It does not respond to its environment. at least before like week 6, and it does not feel pain, at least before like week 20, I think.
I mean, if you stab him, okay. I'd love to have you back on for a further discussion about other like topics aside from just like atheism, because I feel like we could actually have some like pretty in-depth like debates and some ththings. I'm gonna be honest with you, because I'm gonna be straight up. Abortion's not my forte to even discuss with other people because I'm very limited on my knowledge. I just this is just me. I don't lie about anything. There's no reason to, but I've never looked into the actual argument of why you should be against abortion. I just have the moral judgment of myself of being against it, and that's the extent I've ever gone and looking into it. So I can just respect your understanding, because you have a better hypothesis on it than I ever have in any sense, aside from me just being like, nah, it's wrong, I disagree with it. That's the furthest of my argument. Yeah, but I like to, did you come up with the classifications of, kind of what makes a being like that, or was that something you kind of adopted though?
I'd say maybe a little bit of both. Like part of it is just my own personal judgment, and part of it is probably based off of stuff that I've read. I don't really know.
Gotcha.
But like, it's like, I feel like I have the liberty of exploring those kinds of ideas because of my drop away from religion. Like, if I held my religious beliefs from my childhood and from my parents, I wouldn't have the option of believing anything other than that fetus is a human being with a soul from the moment of conception, because that's exactly what my parents believed. Like, if I didn't believe from that, if I didn't deviate from that, that's what I would believe today. But I did deviate from their religious beliefs. They believe that life begins at conception in large part because of their religious beliefs. So like, without that, I don't need to stay in that point anymore. I have the freedom to like evaluate other options, consider other points of view, and hopefully arrive at a more ethical like set of beliefs. So one of the things that is kind of required if there's no such thing as souls, and if there isn't a God to tell you when something is or is not acceptable, is that you have to start judging that for yourself. Or we as a society have to start judging that. And so those are just the questions that people have historically kind of thought are important. Like, why is murder wrong? Well, it's a human being. Okay, well, why is cruelty to animals wrong? More complicated. If cruelty to animals is wrong, why is killing them at all not wrong? That's another different dilemma. I feel like those kinds of things all get synthesized after a certain point. And you just have to kind of fall. You have to make a decision at some point about whether these things are acceptable. Here, this is where I am.
Valid. I agree. I think it's a little devil's advocate wise. I think it's a little just curious, because the detachment from your idea with abortion being solely implemented on you because of your family's belief system. You said it was like, okay, it's time to let go of this now because I don't follow this notion anymore. If that's the case, why aren't you a serial killer? Why aren't you having intercourse with your neighbor's wife or husband, or stuff like that? Why you still confide to commandments? I assume you're not a serial killer. I hope. So it's.
But those are different things. Like
okay.
I didn't stop believing every single thing that my parents believe in just because I stopped believing their religious beliefs. It's just certain beliefs of theirs, they only have because of their religious beliefs. And so if I don't share those religious beliefs, one of two things needs to happen. Either I need to change my mind, or I need to find a different unrelated reason to believe that thing. For abortion, I never found an unrelated reason to believe that abortion was wrong. Like, it seems like abortion is perfectly acceptable, like not at all morally questionable for the first many weeks. And then after that, on a more human and like concrete basis, like, I don't feel like one person's life is more important than another person's bodily autonomy. So like, I feel like it is cruel to women to not allow them to use their body for their own purposes and to require them to host another person. I feel like that's cruel. But it's not, I'm not a serial killer because I do have other independent reasons to not be a serial killer. You know, like, I don't want to take anybody's life. I think that would be unethical because I don't want to violate their bodily autonomy. I am not pro-life because I don't want to violate people's bodily autonomy.
I think I hear you out. I think it kind of contradicts, though, you know, in a sense that, you know, you're not against... You don't want to end a life because it's a life. And it doesn't contradict. It's just very subjective. It's hard for me to be nuanced in this because obviously I have a preconceived idea of it. This is the reason none of these conversations typically go too far, just to be honest with you. Because I think the abortion debate's probably the worst conversation to ever be had about any topic ever. I've never once heard a civilized conversation about it. That's why I stopped trying to have it and talk about it and like hear other people do it. Just because how can two people come to terms with an actual parameters for a debate when one person or one party doesn't see an organism as a living thing compared to something? So the conversation isn't about like should abortion be legal or not. It comes down to the fact is, do you see a fetus as an organism that is a human? And half the people don't, half the people do. So it's like there's never going to be traction in this conversation for that one reason alone, because one side of the argument doesn't view it as a human being. I don't know how anyone can argue something with somebody who has such a vast difference of perspective understanding of an idea, you know?
So I do hear you. It's usually not a fruitful conversation. I accept that. But on the other hand, like even with something like, is this a human being? Like, you can have a discussion about why you do or do not think that it's a human being. Here's an example. Like, before fertilization of the egg, sperm plus egg, a lot of people don't think that that's a human. But then they think that once the sperm meets the egg and that egg is fertilized, it's now a human being. Okay. Why is that the line that they've drawn? I feel like that is a fairly arbitrary line, just like any other line. Like, human beings are multicellular organisms, but at the point of fertilization, it's a single-celled organism. That's a difference, right? That's an articulable difference. So maybe the line is actually when it's two cells. Maybe the first division is when it's actually a human. Okay, well, human beings are also capable of abstract thought. So maybe it's when the embryo develops to the point that it has abstract thoughts. Well, there's a dangerous point there because now we're talking about it being a toddler. And that's a little bit late for an abortion. So, like, I feel like by taking it apart and trying to figure out where people are coming from and why, you can have more of a discussion. Like, I can tell you that I don't care about the fact that it's a human being. That's not why I think that it's wrong to kill a human being. I think that it's wrong to kill a human being not because they're a human being, but because they can form memories, they feel pain, they have lives to live, they have bodily autonomy and understand what that means, and that you can't mess with that. You know, that's why I think it's wrong to kill a human being. It's not because they just pass the mark, oh, you're a human being. I also think that it's wrong to, like, kill an elephant. Like, elephants are pretty intelligent creatures, right? Like, if that elephant isn't hurting anybody, why would you kill it? Why would you? that seems really, really cruel. Yeah, that's where I come from come at this from. Like, the fact that it has all of a human's chromosomes doesn't matter to me.
In a year, though, this is what I can't wrap my head around. In 9 months from conception, you'll accept it that it has these parameters that you've set as guidelines for species, regardless of consciousness, because you don't perceive the consciousness as what's it called? I can't think of the freaking word. As a rationale. You don't believe in consciousness. Okay, so that's, which I actually, it's pretty interesting, and I'd like to talk about that after. I'm not consciousness. Soul. I'm sorry. Soul. I'm sorry. I
mean, I do believe. Yeah.
I think those are pretty. You believe in consciousness, I assume, because we're having this conversation. So there has to be some level of consciousness to some extent, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry for misquoting you there. I just in 9 months after these cells are developing, by your parameters, there'll be a conscious being who shouldn't kill because of the systems anyways. It's not like when this thing's developing,
Right.
it's just gonna come out stagnant. It's gonna do nothing. It's just gonna lay there like stiff as a board and not even do anything. This
If it's lucky, yeah.
well, yeah, obviously some cases would. Yeah, that was, yeah. I didn't mean it in like that sounded very bad now thinking about it. I didn't mean it as like a stillborn type of thing or anything like that. I meant it's just like it's not going to be an organism that literally sits there with no heartbeat, no brain function. It's not just going to be dead weight. It's going to be a living thing.
A newborn child, I think, carries moral weight.
So what's up with what's the distinction there is what I'm not kind of getting, because it's like
it's able to form memories.
Yes, but you're preventing that from developing, because it's gonna turn into that if there's no intervention.
Who decided that mattered?
Based on your standards, I assumed you did, because you think that due to your parameters that's what consists. I mean, that's what makes up a conscious being that shouldn't be killed. But you're by playing, no pun intended, by playing God.
There's a difference between preventing somebody from existing and killing them. Like if I wear a condom, I'm preventing somebody from existing.
Okay, this is what you were referring to previously, in a sense. This is, for me, I don't see sperm as a tied to consciousness. I see it as potentiality to turn into it. So for me, ejaculation.
Well, I also don't,
okay.
I don't think that potentiality matters at all, but I agree with you. I don't think that they're conscious.
But why does the potentiality matter? Because you're very rigid in not ending humanity or life of conscious beings for certain particular reasons, which I agree with that. I agree with the reasons as well and the rationales. But you would prevent them from reaching that state where you wouldn't kill them.
Well, yeah, like by wearing a condom.
Again, it's subjective, because I don't tie conscious thought and being into sperm cells. I tie them into the combination of an egg and the months long development of a being. I don't think ejaculation is murder, personally.
Why is that different? Ultimately, we're made of matter.
Fuck, you got me. No, it isn't different. It isn't different.
The fertilized egg is exactly the same matter as the sperm plus egg system, like before fertilization. It's the same matter. Like nothing physically changed when the sperm went into that egg. Right?
Yeah.
Is there, like, unless you believe in like an extra dimension, where there's this spiritual energy that we get our souls from, and for some reason, the moment of conception, this extra dimensional energy decides, oh, you know what? I'm going to target this zygote, and I'm going to give this thing a soul. Like, unless you believe in some kind of system like that, like that just doesn't make as much sense. Like, it doesn't make sense that before the fertilization, it had any less potentiality than after the system.
I agree that you got me in the sense that I don't see ejaculation as bad as abortion, but it's the same argument that I'm making with you. I contradicted myself in that sense, because it's still preventing. It's the same thing. It's just one step behind what the the development of the embryo would be. My point still stands. To be honest with you, I was caught in some nonsense there. I really have to reevaluate my understanding and perception of ejaculation. And I'm not saying that as like a joke. I'm actually thinking about it as we're having this conversation now. But my point still kind of stands. I haven't really lost my point of that. I still see it as kind of a contradictory statement to hold such praise to conscious beings, but then preventing it from arising into the consciousness that it can become and will become without intervention of godlike powers that humans possess in this realm to do that.
I just don't see the contradiction, I guess. Like, I just don't see... I don't see how it's the same thing to prevent somebody from existing as it...
Yeah.
I don't see how that would be the same as ending somebody's life if they currently exist.
Because
Like,
I know what it is. It's the distinction between souls. I correlate a soul to the beings, to the humans that are still developing. I tie a soul to them, just like I tie a soul to you or me. Obviously, it's soul is subjective, but that's how I perceive it. So my whole argument's based on subjective thought, and I'll be very open about that. Like I said, starting it, I've never looked into talking points. I've never really elaborated in my own head about it. I just believe what I believe in it, and that's pretty much it. And not in like a disrespectful way, but it's literally the one you brought up, the one topic in existence that I am rigid on my beliefs on 9,000% and won't allow any room for changing my mind. To be honest with you.
Oh, I just thought of a choice question.
Okay.
That might help clear this up a little bit. I'm giving you the choice between these two options. There's no middle ground. You can either go back in time and prevent me from existing ever.
Prevent what? Sorry.
Prevent me from existing. Me personally, Joseph. Yep. You could prevent me from existing. That's option one. Or you could kill me where I stand. My death will be painless. You're going to use laser vision and I will be immediately vaporized. Which of those two things would you rather do?
I'd prevent you from existing in the first place, simply due to the fact that you've already lived. Because you've lived a whole life already, practically. However many years you've been alive, I wouldn't take that away from you. I'd prevent it from happening, so that you wouldn't have to go on. Because I'm a reincarnation type. I wouldn't want you to go on to the next whatever with the memory of that. I'd rather just prevent that, so you wouldn't have to hyperfixate on that.
That makes sense to me. I think I agree.
Yeah.
But do you think that indicates that there is a moral difference between preventing somebody from existing and ending their life?
No, I see them one and the same.
To me, what that indicates is that there is a moral difference. There is a difference between choosing to prevent somebody to exist and ending their life, because you would rather prevent somebody from existing than ending their life. I feel like our preferences tend to align with our ethics.
If you threw the example at me of Genghis Khan, I'd kill him in real day opposed to before he was born. Because for the sheer fact of how vicious of a human he was, how much damage he had caused. I'd want him to know the torment he caused on Earth for when the next whatever chapter of existence happens, so the baggage stays with them. You as a person, I don't know the extent of your life. I assume you're not a terrible human being. Just based on this conversation we've had this far, I've concluded that. So I wouldn't want you to have to go on knowing. I'd prevent it in that way. I don't see it as a moral thing. In the sense of it is moral, but not in the moral sense of like one's more powerful than the other. It's more just how do I want this person to move on to the next part of existence? How would I want them to be best suited if I had to choose? If that makes sense.
I want to go back to the Genghis Khan example. I would absolutely prevent Genghis Khan from existing, because that just means that the horrible things that he did didn't happen.
I'm not a proponent of changing history in any regard. So yeah.
Well, I mean, in that case, you wouldn't want to go back in time and prevent me from existing.
Okay, hear me out. If I kill Genghis Khan as a embryo, is anything changing in modern day, or does history stay the same, minus the casualties, but everything else is pretty much similar? Is it going to have catastrophic ramifications if I kill him?
To be honest, I don't really know. Let's assume that there's nothing. Let's assume that nothing changes. That's actually the most fair judgment.
Then I kill him in an embryonic stage.
Yeah, because what I actually want to judge here is the difference between preventing somebody from existing and killing them. So if other stuff changes, that just messes with the equation.
Okay, my fault on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, if nothing's changing, and I'm just turning to like a sci-fi movie type of thing here, thinking of ramifications for what could happen. If nothing's changing and like the world's not going to end or whatever, yeah, I'd kill him in an embryonic stage just for the rationale of preventing whatever the countless deaths, rapes, and pillages that he caused. But at the same time, it's not because of the fact that I think it's not murder. It's because of the fact of why not save those lives if nothing's going to change, I guess, but it's either or for me. They hold the same validity. It's still murder in my mind.
I'm not sure if you misspoke, but if nothing changes, then if you kill him when he's an embryo, then all of the people still die, except for he's just not alive for it. This is kind of off the rails because now we're talking about this strange fictional history.
Where we went real deep.
We abort Genghis Khan, but also all the people that he killed still die somehow.
The simulation masters are laughing their asses off right now. Let me tell you, brother. Jesus. All right, dude, we're 3 hours in. You want to wrap it up with one more connecting point to the main topic? Not even main topic, but it was kind of, I guess it's the soul aspect. Are you cool with kind of wrapping it up on a discussion on souls real quick?
Sure, I love talking about souls.
Perfect. And again, sorry for the derailment there. That was kind of fun in a sense, but it was very ridiculously derailed. What's it called? Okay, so what's your rationale for not believing in souls? Like, what's that stemmed from?
Yeah, so I believe in things mostly in the capacity that they help me explain things about the world, or help other people explain things about the world. So, for example, here's something that I do believe. I am sitting on a chair. I believe that I'm sitting on a chair because that is a better explanation to me than that I'm being held up by a mysterious force that looks like a chair, or any of the other alternative hypotheses that I could come up with. I believe that the Earth revolves around the sun because of the phases of Venus. I know that when Galileo was looking through his telescope, he looked at Venus and he saw the way the shadow and the light moved across Venus, and it was more consistent with a heliocentric model of the solar system than a geocentric model of the solar system. So I believe that thing because it helps us explain the stuff that we're seeing. What would I be able to better explain by postulating a soul that I wouldn't be able to explain without a soul? And I can't come up with anything.
So how do you differentiate that from consciousness then? Because I've kind of seen them as intertwinable when it comes to that. Because that would be my rationale, because I feel like everything that a conscious being does is based on the existence of a soul.
Yeah, so most soul concepts are of an eternal soul. So like
Gotcha.
for some religions, the eternal soul survives after death and it goes to heaven or hell or purgatory or whatever. And then for some, it's a part of like a reincarnation cycle. Like your soul ends in this body, but then it gets picked up again in another body. Or for the Buddhist conception of reincarnation, it just changes forms. It's not you're reincarnated. It's the same soul, but it's just reborn in different bodies, which is a subtle difference. It doesn't make sense to me that without believing in an afterlife, there's nothing that persists after death. So the only thing that a soul would do for me as an explanation would be to help explain stuff like consciousness or explain ethics. Some people use a soul to explain knowledge of right and wrong, that kind of stuff. But I feel like we have good explanations for that without something that's not physical. Like, I feel like our understanding of physical systems or biological systems is a good enough understanding for us to account for the stuff that you would usually use a soul to explain. For example, our ethics. Well, actually, I guess I'll turn it over to you. Like, what do you think is best explained by a soul that other explanations fall short on?
You know, as soon as you said that, I thought compassion was the first thing I thought of, and then immediately I was like, well, that's just chemical changes in my brain. You know, it's not really soul oriented. You know, I have dopamine, I have serotonin, I have endorphins, I have oxytocin. I have a plethora of chemicals in my brain and body that make me think and feel how I do. You know, if I don't take adequate amounts of vitamin D every day from the sun or supplementation, I'm not gonna have proper serotonin levels, and in return, I'm probably gonna be more of a dick. You know, I'm probably gonna be more sad and shit. So
yeah, exactly. Like ultimately, it's like our emotions and our emotional responses, our capacity to care, that's all a big, wet chemical system. There's a little bit of electricity in there too. But for the most part, it's like a physical thing that can be understood, and some people, like, we don't understand it fully because there's a lot of variation in human beings, but like we've got a decent understanding of the kinds of things that can go wrong that make somebody a complete dick all of the time, or the kinds of things that can go right, that human beings share in common with other species like elephants or dolphins, to also help members of their own species and feel compassion or act altruistically.
Yeah, I guess when perspectivizing it that way, it's not really there's no real actual need for a soul that's not explainable by just the environment that our body is in the state of intake of what we consume, and just in food, in liquid, in beverages, in media, in information of ideas. I think everything is so overwhelmingly stimulating to who we are as a person that I feel like it kind of, in a sense, shapes who we. Obviously, it shapes who we are, but I feel like this part of me is like, okay, yeah, you don't need a soul to explain all these things, but not even in a religious sense. It's just, this is gonna sound ridiculous, but I have a feeling that I have a soul. I have a feeling that I have more than just a consciousness that's self-aware of my environment. I have a strong feeling that when I finally die, from this physical carnation, that I'm going to still be somewhere. I don't know where. I'm not going to perspectivize where. I've thought about it, but I have no concrete way of knowing. I'm not going to say what's real, what's not. But I just have a feeling for myself that, like, that's how it is. I always have, even when I was pretty fully against religion, when I was agnostic to it at one point. All of that, I always believed in the existence of a soul. I don't know if it's baggage from Christianity or if it's my actual belief, but it's just part of me that fully believes in it.
I mean, that makes sense. Like, there's nothing inherently religious about a belief in a soul. It's pretty common. Like, and in different religions, you'll have different conceptions of the soul. But believing in a soul isn't necessarily a religious thing. Like, there are some people who I assume believe in some kind of soul structure, where all living beings are potentially, when they die, they become part of the all, part of the everything. Like, sort of like what a pantheist thinks of the universe and God, but without necessarily believing in a God, because if it's not conscious, is it a God? Just splitting hairs there, but it's not necessarily like a religious concept. It's a supernatural concept, usually. Oh, hello?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Sorry, I accidentally hit a button.
Oh, no worries.
But it is a supernatural concept, and if you reject all the supernatural concepts, you probably don't believe any souls, but it's not necessarily tied to atheism, but it is a common... there's a lot of overlap there, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
I think the supernatural aspect and the religious aspect kind of they kind of butt heads too. They share a lot of the same things, but they also kind of contradict one another. But I feel like you're right with the existence of the soul kind of being to both of them. Traditionally, when people claim they see spirits of dead people or whatnot, it's usually they believe that's the soul that's attached to the land, or the whatever, the sorrow from it's whatever it is. It's usually the soul. It's never just like the energy typically, unless it's like a poltergeist type of thing or whatever. But usually when you see a ghost, it's like that.
You just reminded me of a fantastic argument I got into one time. It was in person. It wasn't online, so we got to feel the full emotion of it.
Yep.
But I said something. I don't remember what the situation was, but I said my ghost was tired. And the ghost inside of me, as I was speaking with flowery language. And they were like, "Wait, do you mean your soul?" And my response that kicked off the entire argument was, "What's the difference between a ghost and a soul?" Jeez. And that started the entire thing. And there were different ideas being thrown about, like, well, a ghost is a dead soul, but if a soul doesn't die and it's eternally persisting, is it ever really dead?
Yeah.
Or only living things with souls? What has souls? What doesn't? Are there plant ghosts? What? It just went all over the place.
Dude, I would have loved to be a fucking fly on the wall in that conversation, just based off that description. That's pretty funny. How did that end up? How did the conversation kind of wrap up with? What was the kind of consensus after that?
We didn't reach much of a consensus. I think that, yeah, after a certain point, it was just two of us involved, and we were kind of on the same side of it the entire time. Everybody else had left the conversation, and we kept talking about it for a bit, but the last things that were said were from two people who already agreed with each other, so it wasn't necessarily super interesting in that sense.
Gotcha.
But I mean, like, I don't think that there's necessarily a difference. Like, I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in souls. But like, if you believe that ghosts are the spirits of the dead walking around, like that's a soul, right? What's the difference between that soul and my soul? Like, is it literally just the difference in that one of them has a body and one of them doesn't? If that's the difference, and if a soul is not a physical entity, then that's not a difference with respect to the soul. So they're the same thing.
That's valid. That's valid. I think that kind of ties down to the fact that we unanimously, as people who do believe in spirits, kind of just agree that like ghosts are just souls of dead people. I think that's up to interpretation, obviously, but a lot of people accept that as like the truth. So like, if we move that piece out of it, I feel like it kind of changes the argument a little bit. I feel like it's a lot of reliance on that being accurate. But for that scenario, I agree.
I do have an alternative. Most people, I would say nearly everybody, believes that ghosts are the souls of the dead. You know, you die, you have a soul, it's disembodied now, and so it's wandering around. That's a ghost. But what is a ghost? Why do we believe in ghosts? Well, we believe in ghosts because some people believe that those are the best explanation for what's happening around them. Like, there's some paranormal phenomenon happening around them. They think there's stuff moving. They're getting visions of the dead. Maybe they have night terrors. They hear sounds at night, that kind of stuff. And they think, oh, it's a ghost. It's a spirit of the dead. Here's my alternative. My alternative hypothesis is that it's actually wizards, invisible, having a magic battle.
You can't see me right now, but I have a big-ass smile on my face.
I think that is exactly as valid of a guess as ghosts being the souls of the dead.
Jesus.
Like, just assuming that they're right about the sounds at night, and like just assuming that there's no physical explanation. Assuming that there's no physical explanation for the stuff moving around their house, for their visions, for their night terrors, or the different sounds that they're hearing. Why would it be more likely that it's the spirits of the dead than that it's likely that two wizards are invisibly having a fight in your house?
No, it literally, no, I agree. Someone believes in ghosts coming from me. I think it's like, I'm like, nah, that's ridiculous. But at the same time, like, that is a very valid comparison because it literally could be absolutely any tangible thing that you could think of could be an alternative.
It could be anything.
Yeah.
Once you start talking about, once you start thinking about things, once you start explaining things with stuff that's not physical, you have a lot more options. You don't just have to stick with the standard soul stuff. Like, it could be a bugbear or a goblin. That's where a lot of that kind of folklore comes from. People believed in fairies and elves and goblins because stuff was moving around their house. It was similar kinds of stuff. Or like, people would go missing. Maybe it's ghosts. Maybe it's goblins. Maybe it's two invisible wizards having a fight. Who knows?
Maybe it's giant reptilian lizards wearing suits, making moves in government. Who knows?
Yeah.
Listen, man, we're about 3:20 in right now. That was a crazy conversation. I appreciate you joining me so much, man. Jeez, man, that was great. That was great. I like how we hopped around from pretty much the broadest spectrum of topics imaginable. Kind of found a way to connect them, though. That's kind of cool.
A bunch of tangentially related topics is the best conversation.
That's what it's all about. Anywhere that you'd like to shout out, where I don't know if you have like social media that you put stuff on or anything like that, or just shout out anything you want to do, feel free to do it now. And yeah.
I really don't. I mean, I don't have my own podcast. I don't have anything like that. I just am really interested in this topic, and I have opinions.
Hell yeah. Well, I'd recommend doing something, man. The video series, like journaling posts, anything. Man, I'd love to personally just like listen to you talk to people who actually know what's going on, compared to just me, who's kind of just throwing shit at the wall and see what happens. Because I feel like the amount of like you can get some serious depth related conversations with people who had strong conflicting views that it would be very interesting to actually listen to. I feel like it would be very beneficial for a lot of people, kind of on the spectrum of these ideas. If you were going up against other people and whatnot, it'd be great.
Well, I did just get a new microphone, so maybe I'll look into that in the near future.
Hell yeah. Also, you have the best audio quality of any guest I've ever had over Discord or Zoom, so appreciate you on that.
Oh, awesome.
It's really it's usually like me on a Blue Yeti and then someone on an iPhone, so it's very refreshing to have someone with actual audio levels, so thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem.
Hell yeah. All right, well, again, thank you for joining me. Thanks everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed me rambling and him spitting crazy facts and just stuff like that. And we live in a simulation, so thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. And talk to you guys later. Thanks for watching. Take care.